platforms. Through their efforts, they're helping to create viable business models that will harness the full potential of our various media, both new and traditional. Participating in this panel in alphabetical order are Scott Gensler, Senior Vice President of Corporate and Business Development, Current TV; Eddie W. Hartenstein, Publisher and CEO, Los Angeles Times; John Heller, Co-founder and Co-CEO of Freewheel Media Incorporated; Ravi Kapoor, Vice President, KAXT LLC, licensee of station KAXT-CA, San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose; Sam Matheny, who's General Manager, News Over Wireless, CBC New Media Group, LLC; Travis Parsons, Senior Director, Business Development of Sesame; Brad Pilo, CEO of ITV; and Tim Westergren, Founder and Chief Strategy Officer of Pandora Media. Mr. Gensler, could you start with your comments?
Happy to. Good morning. So I will keep my comments relatively brief and didn't prepare anything too formal, but I thought it'd be helpful to start off and tell you a little bit about my background and where I've been, at least in recent history. So about 6 years ago, I joined a company called Grouper Networks, which was one of the early movers in the online video space. And so, if you would have asked me some of these questions at that point, my answers would be dramatically different than they are today, interestingly enough. Long story short, that company was acquired by Sony Pictures, and so made the transition from a very entrepreneurial online video company to a Hollywood studio, and was there for about 2 years before joining Current TV, and that was about 2.5 years ago. And Current, for those that aren't aware, some of the things that we're really proud of. One, we are the fastest growing cable and satellite network in history. We're in 70 million homes worldwide, about 55 million U.S., with most of the major cable and satellite distributors. We are the youngest network ever to win an Emmy for interactive television. And, interestingly, as we talk about, perhaps there's never been a more critical worldwide need for independent information. And as we watch so many news entities really move away from independent journalism, and, lots of bureaus and lots of well-staffed bureaus in lots of different places, Current's really driving towards it and trying to innovate and find models of storytelling that still tell the world's and even down to the local level most important and passionate stories in a way that is economically viable and still entertaining. And one of the shows we're most proud of is a show called Vanguard Journalism. As an example, we have a new season of that launching next Wednesday night on Current at 10 p.m. And the first episode is about Uganda, and covering a fascinating story about how U.S. missionaries have been an enormous part of anti-gay legislation in Uganda that is putting up potentially the death penalty for being gay in Uganda, which is a critically important story in the world that most people that I'm aware of haven't heard of and haven't been a part of. Other interesting things about Current. So Current also came out with the idea of user-generated content on television before there was a YouTube. Al Gore and Joel Hyatt many years ago, really wanted to democratize the television. And I think many of us back then felt that, HD-enabled cameras and editing software being accessible by everywhere would indeed democratize, the television format. And I think what many of us who have dabbled with user-generated content have learned is that, despite the proliferation of HD-enabled cameras and editing software, very few individuals can go out and put together a piece of television or film that can garner a large audience or be of unbelievable quality. Not to say that individual participation isn't critically important in the world and to our business, because it is. But the lesson we've learned is that quality counts, and professional storytelling and entertainment really does count. And so, one of our focuses at Current over the last year has really been to seek out methods of participation and methods of user involvement that have a much lower bar to participation. My rule is, can my mom figure out how to do this and still be an influence, but still come out the other end with a highly entertaining and impactful piece of television and storytelling. So that's really our current focus, as well as figuring out, from a storytelling perspective, how to economically tell the world's most important, impactful stories in ways no one else is telling them.
Thank you, Mr. Gensler. Mr. Hartenstein?
Thank you so much. My name's Eddie Hartenstein. Good morning. I'm the publisher and chief executive officer of the Los Angeles Times, one of 8 daily newspapers of the Tribune Company. It's my pleasure to join you here this morning. It's rather timely in that we have just filed applications with the Commission to transfer some of our, not all of our 24 licenses from our debtor-in-possession company to a set of restructured companies, a necessary step for us, Tribune, to emerge from Chapter 11 reorganization and bankruptcy. It's our hope and expectation to obtain those approvals and to emerge with our properties intact and able to continue providing the outstanding news and information coverage that our local audiences across the nation have come to expect. I'm grateful to share some of the opportunities of the Los Angeles Times experience and offer some observations and recommendations about existing FCC regulations and the need to ensure that government intervention does not further hinder media operations and innovation given the current environment of rapid economic change and huge technological change. Tribune, with its 8 newspapers, 23 television stations, WGN Radio in Chicago, and its more than 50 websites, has a history of innovation. It's shaped not only the way Tribune operates and conducts its business, but that of the industries in which Tribune operates, which all ultimately we feel benefit the communities that we serve. In Chicago, we've operated a major daily newspaper, a television station, and a radio station together for almost 60 years. In addition, for 10 years, we've operated daily newspapers and television stations in Los Angeles, Hartford, Connecticut, and until recently in New York. In each of those cities, we have increased and improved localism through diversity while making our properties in each of these markets more effective at serving their respective audiences. Since the 2000 merger of Tribune and the Times-Mirror Company, with the support of each of those in-market newspapers, Tribune has increased the amount of locally originated television program and news programming by our stations. In Los Angeles, for example, our KTLA television station has added 22 hours of locally originated newscasts to its weekly schedule, and we now broadcast 46 and a half hours of local television news each week. That's more than any other television station in the market. We've developed both the technical means to facilitating or sharing of original content and the cultural incentives to encourage collaboration without interfering with the independent editorial voice of each of those entities. We've pursued new distribution channels, giving our audiences greater access to news and information where and when they want it, and including Spanish language services, newspapers, websites such as Hoy Los Angeles, newspapers, web, and social media sites like BrandX, which is it's a year old now, newspaper in Los Angeles. Today, the Tribune reaches audiences through local newspaper publishing, local television and radio broadcasting, and the Internet. Every one of our properties has its website, and many Tribune properties offer news email alerts, access to content via wireless devices, Kindle subscription, iPhone apps, RSS feeds, and mobile web apps. LATimes.com is a particularly popular local news destination for our users, but we find out that we are really viewed around the world. We've got 9.2 million unique visitors per month. And while the website continues to grow local traffic, we find out that over 2/3 of our users are from outside the greater Los Angeles area. We maintain more than 45 blogs, some 25,000 posts in 2009, to which more than half of our newsroom staff contribute content. We're home, in fact, to 2 of the top 25 media blogs in the world, Top of the Ticket, which is a politically oriented blog, and LA Now. Tribune's newspaper and broadcast properties are also utilizing social media and mobile distribution platforms to deliver content and build communities. Most Tribune properties have Facebook accounts, MySpace pages, YouTube channels, We participate in Twitter and other social media outlets. At the end of 2009, the Los Angeles Times social media audience had grown to over 1 million subscribers, including nearly 500,000 followers of our some 200 Twitter accounts, which we routinely use to disseminate news about local LA phenomenon, brush fires, earthquakes, and other important breaking news. Who got arrested drunk, what morning, and where, and what the circumstances are. The Los Angeles Times mobile site currently receives approximately 20 million page views per month, and there are plans to offer an LA Times Reader application that will offer social media elements, enabling our own users to contribute their own original content. Many Tribune properties, including the LA Times and KTLA, offer customized iPhone apps, allowing users to access real-time local news, traffic, sports, weather, and access not only our own websites but standalone apps of our own. We've done all of this without compromising either the quality of public service or being true to the constituencies that we talk to. Tribune's publications are known for award-winning journalism. A combined 94 Pulitzer Prizes, 39 of which from the Los Angeles Times, including one most recently just last year. Tribune newspapers are read by 8 million people on weekdays and over 11 million on Sundays. And our websites in aggregate have attract more than 20 million uniques per month. And as Tribune delivers these benefits in an exceedingly different economic environment with increasing competition from local and national sources, we also are very conscious of how the audiences have fragmented, and we try to address all of those that we can as well. The cost of covering local news continues to increase as core cities and suburbs give way to more sprawling multi-county metropolises, or metropolises, however the plural is, and for our own newspapers to cover the hundreds of municipal government boards, local school boards, public bodies, requires a small army of editorial staffers and freelance writers, far more than any radio or television station. The Los Angeles Times and Chicago Tribune alone, just 2 of the 8 properties, employ almost 1,000 editorial staffers, even after the severe budget cuts that we've gone through in the last 2 years. And this is to say nothing of the other resources that we require to print and distribute our product. The mayor mentioned Mr. Gutenberg, and we're one media that until recently has not changed its mode of distribution very much, but we're working to change that. But just to give you an idea, to serve our primary market in Los Angeles of some 26,000 square miles, 5 Southern California counties, we have 2 printing presses, 2 printing facilities, 11 plants, almost 3,000 carriers to distribute all of our product, and some 18,000 single copy outlets. It's a very large area, and we drive over 750,000 miles a week just to do that. So it's a very resource-intensive news gathering enterprise, and it's one where, in order to keep pace with the rapid changes and consumer adaptations of technological change, we should be free of the Commission's structural restraints. The financial and economic environment in which we operate have become exceedingly difficult and fragmented. Traditional advertising revenues have been significantly affected. You need no further than the Internet and entities like Craigslist to see where Internet advertising is going and taking that away from what has traditionally been newspapers. And we've created and been witness to an almost perfect storm that's spawned restructuring in the industry. There have been, since December 2008, 9 major newspaper publishers representing some 130 daily and 280 weekly publications that have declared bankruptcy, filing for Chapter 11 reorganization, including Tribune, of course. And while we see these economic conditions change, we compete not only with local and daily newspapers, television stations, and other news sites, but also the national and international accounts, the likes of CNN, MSNBC, Google, Yahoo, Huffington Post, BBC, and others. So in conclusion, the Los Angeles Times and Tribune strongly believe that newspapers remain a critical and trusted source of information and create a sense of community, and also they're one of the few remaining original sources of investigations and analyses to help people understand the complex issues and events of today's time. And despite the challenges facing traditional media companies, we continue to pursue comprehensive, high-quality news while finding new distribution channels. The news gathering function is resource-intensive, but one that is absolutely critical to a vibrant and free society. To best preserve that function, we feel it's an increasingly competitive environment and increasingly important that the Commission should free newspapers from the constraints posed by the cross-ownership rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hartenstein. Mr. Heller?
Thank you. Freewheel is a little bit different. We're not a content company or a distributor. We're actually an infrastructure and tools provider that services these companies. And to Ed's point, the challenges we try to help them with are these economic and technical changes. Probably the easiest way to describe it is to describe how we founded the company. I was on my couch watching cartoons, frankly, and it was Star Wars Clone Wars with a Macintosh Mini hooked up to a large flat-screen television. And it was on a website called Veo. And it was apparent to me, our background is both television and internet advertising, so we focus mostly on monetization, that George Lucas actually owned the rights to Star Wars Clone Wars. And the Cartoon Network, subsidiary of the Turner Broadcasting Company, George Lucas actually owns Star Wars Clone Wars. The Cartoon Network owns the rights to display it and monetize it. Veo distributed it, I'm not clear on the relationship, and then there were advertisements happening in and around it that also wasn't clear what party was providing those. And it became clear to us that that's a mess, and that's an impediment to being able to grow in this new world and handle many distribution channels. So we launched a flagship product called Monetization Rights Management. And the concept is around the fact that, look, consumers want to consume the show. They want to watch Clone Wars on a phone, on an iPad, hooked up in their living room, on a PC, that from the consumer's perspective, access is what they're looking for, just freedom of access. And that creates a lot of challenges so all the way back at the other end of the economic spectrum, that creates many challenges for advertisers, because an advertiser is looking for a single holistic large audience to get their message to. So what's happened recently with this proliferation of choice is in the middle is a series of hurdles for both the content creation and television and newspaper companies and the distributors, where they have both economic challenges about how to make the advertisers meet their needs, business relationship challenges about who's allowed to do what and who's not in all these various circumstances, and there's technical chaos across all the various platforms. So with a very strong focus on how do you make that consumer happy, because when you get in their way, they tend to sort of find ways around you, and how do you make the advertisers happy, our job has been to sort of knock down those hurdles and sort of machete the paths through the jungle and make it possible for all these companies to grow their audience, sell it at its premium value, and make money off of it so that they're economically incented to do so, and to handle all of the sort of technical and sort of accounting challenges around that, because there's simply a lot of physical impediments to giving the consumers the choice they want. And our view is however the business relationships need to be is something to be negotiated amongst the parties in the industry, and the technology impediments shouldn't force certain business arrangements. So our clients are ranging from companies like Turner and ESPN and Major League Baseball, Warner Brothers, CBS Television Syndication, all the way down to TV.com and Sling and Veo and a number of the companies that sort of center more on audience. So if you think of all the ways content has been distributed in the past, it's happening again just across many different wires and many different pipes, with perhaps shifting business relationships amongst the parties. And our view is those parties, in order to make the consumer happy, need to give them the choice and access they want, but in order to make themselves happy, the advertisers need to be satisfied with an easy and efficient method of buying an audience regardless of where it's occurring. And in between our business relationship, simple advertising execution, well, not simple, but complex advertising execution, and accounting challenges that need to work smoothly regardless of what device or wire the content's being consumed on. So we're really just an enabler trying to get the impediments out of the way and then let the business figure out how it wants to behave as a business. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. Mr. Kapoor?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ravi Kapoor, and I'm with KAXT, America's most diverse television station, situated right here in the Bay Area. It's an absolute honor to be here since less than a year ago, KAXT in its current form didn't exist and almost didn't come to fruition. I'm a journalist by trade who continues to actively report, so I'm going to tell you a story, our story, and hopefully you'll see why preserving spectrum for over-the-air broadcasting is essential in the effort to have media that is truly reflective of our society today. How I'm even sitting before you today is testament to the American dream. I'm of Indian descent, born and raised right here on the peninsula, and went to high school just a few minutes from the Stanford campus. My first appearance on television was when I was 8 years old on a show called Cartoon Classics on Coffee TV 20, and from that point forward, I was hooked. In high school, I interned at a low-power television station in San Francisco, KBI TV 30. It was a new station, and I only discovered it by accident while flipping through the dial. It was an incredible experience, one where I got to work hands-on and learn the television business from the ground up from the owner-operator himself. After going back east for college and working at a number of television stations and technology startup companies, about 2 years ago I reconnected with my mentor from KBI, Warren Trumbly. He's in the audience today, and now he's my business partner. He won't admit to it, but Warren is a visionary. He told me years ago that the digital TV transition, which only took place last year, could finally level the playing field in television, in some sense, by allowing stations to broadcast multiple streams of programming at the same time. He spoke about the importance of localism at an FCC hearing held in Monterey 6 years ago when he was the president of the Community Broadcasters Association, imploring the FCC to look after low-power broadcasters. He said then those 2,600 stations, quote, represent the broadest spectrum of programming and the greatest diversity and ownership of any media. There are more minority-owned and operated LPTV and Class A television stations than all other media combined. His words still ring true today, yet it's clear to me now that I'm in ownership that little is being done to foster true diversity in broadcasting. Deregulation has effectively killed independent voices in our industry. Today, right here in San Francisco, we have 3 duopolies in television and a corporation that runs 10 radio stations. This was not the case when I was young, and I implore the Commission to please get away from the lobbyists within the Beltway and actually see what the Telecommunications Act of 1996 has done to the Fourth Estate. My sensibility is as a journalist first, and so when you see thousands of your colleagues laid off so a corporation can squeeze out a couple of more pennies in their earnings report in an industry specified to serve the public interest, something has to be done about this. Policies need to change. In one of the most diverse areas in the country, KAXT is in effect the last locally owned and operated television station, and not enough people know about us because we're not on cable or satellite. With rare exception, Class A low-power television stations have no must-carry rights, yet we have the most mandates on us. We have to air at least 3 hours of locally produced programming a week, a requirement not imposed on full-power stations, all of whom have cable and satellite must-carry. KAXT is already going above and beyond that statute. We are using our allocated spectrum to the max, broadcasting 12 video channels, 3 radio on TV channels or audio channels, with 5 more in the works. That means our little station by the end of the summer will have 20 channels in all, and we even have 3 mobile DTV channels in testing as we speak. All of this is on one 6 megahertz TV channel, and it's hard to understand why anyone could claim we are not efficient spectrum users unless their agenda is to take our spectrum away. What we're doing today is at the core of why folks were granted FCC licenses in the first place, serving the needs of the community, telling the stories that need to be told. In the crowd today are a whole host of our programmers who make up the most diverse lineup ever assembled in traditional over-the-air broadcasting. These folks saw a pent-up demand in the market and have put together news, entertainment, and cultural programming for their communities at a time of great recession. They are training at-risk and disadvantaged youth to write, report, edit, and shoot. They're tearing down stereotypes and putting on programming that is universal in nature, so all Bay Area residents can get indoctrinated a bit into each culture. The opportunities facilitated by the KAXT platform are immense. Right now, KAXT features two 24/7 Vietnamese channels, the country's first ever free South Asian channel, multiple English and Spanish language channels, and coming this summer, 24/7 channels catering to the Korean, Chinese, and Filipino communities, not to mention a business and real estate channel. Now that's diversity. And it's all coming from a small operation. We're not charging $15 or $20 a month to our communities of color for one single channel of ethnic content. All of our content is available over the air for free. Is KAXT an anomaly? Well, as of today, there's no question we are. And were it not for a brave decision by some good people at the FCC last year to help us get a license, we would not likely be on the air today. You see, as an analog station without must-carry, Warren struggled in recent years to keep KAXT solvent and almost shut down the station entirely in 2008. But then Warren and I worked together to change up the business model and take the station digital. Last summer, 1 week before we were to launch this diverse lineup, a $15 billion conglomerate who already had 2 stations in the market laid claim to the channel frequency Warren requested back in 2007. We thought we were sunk, that this dream of serving the underserved was over. At the same time, the Community Broadcasters Association, the group that advocated for low-power TV in Washington, failed. So the odds of successfully holding on to a digital channel seem slim. Coincidentally, the FCC just released on Wednesday a small entity compliance guide about replacement translators, like the one requested by the $15 billion conglomerate last year, and said that, quote, this rule will have no significant adverse impact on small entities. Well, with respect, that rule almost put us out of business. And it proves the FCC does publish documents that do not accurately measure the true impact on the public. Every replacement translator blocked a channel, closed a door to stations like ours that provide diverse programming, and indeed harmed a small business. Fortunately, in our case, it was the people that fought back. Minority communities, Hispanic, Black, Asian, and Latino, rallied to combat this deliberate attempt to grab more spectrum and more power. It was an event not covered by mainstream media, which really opened my eyes to the way the game is truly played. About a month later, we were able to settle, and the FCC allowed us to proceed, and that is a real credit to them. This whole saga will be featured in an upcoming documentary by Jonathan Cho, a journalist from Chicago. He's in the crowd now, shooting this right now, and we believe it will be one of the most insightful looks into the broadcast industry ever done. We still have immense challenges to overcome at KAXT, but we are humbled by the gratitude expressed to us daily by all of those who watch us over the air. There are 70 channels available for free throughout the Bay Area that can be picked up with an $8 antenna right now. It's pretty amazing stuff. So the next time you're at home, please check out KAXT. Connect a rabbit ear antenna to your TV and scan for the little station that could, because there are still a few of us making strides to cover this vibrant community. While the internet is terrific, it is point-to-point and not able to do point-to-multipoint communication like digital over-the-air broadcasting. They are completely different beasts. Wireless, cell phone, and internet technology have major limitations. One person can't send one message to 1 million like broadcast. Each technology has a preferred use. Taking broadcast spectrum for yet unidentified use by mega corporations should not be part of the FCC's policy. The only way to reach a mass audience is broadcast, and it is because of this spectrum that we can finally showcase all points of view here in the Bay Area. To take away TV spectrum now, a year after the transition, would be a grave mistake. Remember, when we cut off access to information at the fringes, we hurt those who need such information the most. It was the FCC Commissioner Michael Copps himself last year who said, quote, that the sad truth is diversity of this great nation is not reflected in the ownership of its media and its telecommunications facilities. So to the good folks of the FCC and our local, state, and federal leaders, please work with the low-power TV industry more closely. Help get qualified stations serving the public interest obtain the cable and satellite must-carry rights they deserve. Follow the FCC Advisory Committee on Diversity's own credo to, quote, enhance the ability of minorities and women to participate in telecommunications and related industries, a quest the Commission's been trying to tackle for decades. Because at this rate, without help soon, stories like ours will cease to be possible. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kapoor. Mr. Matheny?
Good morning. My name is Sam Matheny, and I'm here representing CBC New Media Group and Capital Broadcasting Company. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share what I hope will be some useful perspectives. I am a new media guy and a broadcaster. I've worked with Capital Broadcasting for almost 15 years, and Capital Broadcasting is a third-generation family-run business founded in 1937 as an AM, first with an AM radio station. Over the last 15 years, I've worked for one of the most visionary and technologically savvy owners in the business, Jim Goodman. Through Jim's vision, I've had the opportunity to assist with numerous internet, wireless, and television projects. I'll go through just a few of those now. In 1995, we launched WRAL.com. This site has won many awards over the years, and most recently, the Murrow Award from the Associated Press for the best large market local news site. It will do over 1 billion page views this year, and according to media audit measurements, WRAL.com is the #1 local media website in the United States, with over 50% of our DMA visiting at least once a month. In 1996, we launched the very first DTV station in the U.S. using an experimental license from the FCC. In 1999, we were the first broadcaster to offer all HD local news. In 2004, we were the first to put local TV content on deck with a wireless carrier, Sprint. In 2008, we launched the first iPhone app for a local TV station. And just last year, we started the first publicly available ATSC mobile broadcast service. In my current role as General Manager of News Over Wireless, I work with about 150 local TV stations across the U.S. News Over Wireless was literally born out of the new distribution opportunities we're here to discuss. At News Over Wireless, we help local broadcasters publish their news, weather, sports, and other information to mobile phones and devices. And it is with this background that I offer the following comments. Free over-the-air local television broadcasting is the most important public communications resource in the United States. The government recognized this fact a little over a year ago when the Obama administration urged Congress to extend the DTV transition to ensure that everyone was prepared, especially the most vulnerable of us. When the transition was complete, over 34 million households, nearly 1 in 3, had applied for a converter box coupon. Right here in the Bay Area, over 522,000 households redeemed a voucher. That's greater than 22% in one of the most wired markets in the United States. All told, almost $1.4 billion was invested in this program. Even more impressive is the fact that, according to the Consumer Electronics Association, over 125 million DTV sets were sold between 2005 and 2009. None of those DTV sets required the converter boxes that were needed. So what makes local television broadcasting so important? It is the public service and the commitment to the community that broadcasters bring every single day. Broadcasters work extremely hard to provide valuable and timely information to their viewers, and they are successful. Pew Research from the Internet and American Life Project recently found that 78% of U.S. citizens identified local television news as their #1 source for news. TVB research indicates that 93 of the top 100 television shows are broadcast television shows over the air. And in a recent 3-screen research study by Nielsen found that Internet viewing is growing, but television still accounts for well over 90% of all video viewing. In December, the LA Times published an article stating viewers were rediscovering rabbit ears and that they would now get 3 times the number of channels as they previously could. Widescreen picture, surround sound audio, and more channels and cost were all cited for the resurgence of over-the-air viewing. The scalability and immediacy of local broadcasting is also what makes it such a valuable resource. It is the gold standard. As Ravi was saying, it is the only medium that can truly reach an infinite number of users with vital information in real time. The coverage is in place, it's ubiquitous. The service is free and does not discriminate based on socioeconomic status. The system is not subject to the bottlenecks and does not clog under load like the internet and cellular networks. It delivers information of national importance like 9/11, as well as targeted local emergency information like the floods in Nashville, Tennessee. Let's talk about the floods in Nashville for just a second. While the cable systems were experiencing on again, off again, up and down service, broadcasters carried the day. They provided vital emergency information for free to everyone on a continuous basis. Our News Over Wireless partner in Nashville, WSMV, produced almost 80 hours of emergency flood coverage for the local community. And when the water started to recede, they did not quit, but continued to serve by producing a telethon for flood relief that raised over $1.7 million to help the victims of the disaster. There were 18 people killed in these floods. This is very impressive, and it is what the broadcasters do every day, serve local communities with vital information that improves the lives of those around them. Broadcasters are adopting and using new technologies to interact with their audiences. These are not replacements for broadcasting, but enhancements. They make us better. Here are some examples of how our partner stations are using technology to improve their offerings. First, WRAL, our CBS affiliate in Raleigh, recently used Facebook to promote exclusive coverage of a foiled kidnapping attempt. WNYW, the Fox affiliate in New York, used our iPhone alert system to reach their mobile users with information about a suspicious package in Times Square. This came almost immediately after the failed terrorist bombing attempt. And WPTV, the West Palm Beach affiliate, used our alert system to try and help identify a young child that had been found wandering the streets. Now, let me add a multiplier, an exponential factor of why local broadcasting will continue to be the most important system for many more tomorrows to come, and that is mobile DTV. I've got tuners. I've got one right here. I'm watching. Got it aired now. It's tuned to the Fox affiliate, KTVU. I've got them for my laptop, for my iPhone, my iPad, and these empower and make possible a much more dynamic system than is available today. Every example I gave you earlier would be vastly improved by the immediate access to greater information that mobile DTV provides. The digital transition is not over. We're in the middle of the next act, the successful deployment of mobile DTV. With mobile DTV, the broadcaster's ability to serve the local community is dramatically improved. There are literally millions of devices that can also be mobile TVs. This will enable the public to always be within arm's reach of vital information and community service provided for free, locally, by over-the-air broadcasters as they travel throughout their day, not limited by time or place. All of the pillars of public service, success, and importance that I outlined earlier are bolstered and made stronger when people have the ability to take that signal with them and they have access to vital information in an instant, regardless of where they might be. We also know very well that mobile DTV is good and complementary to the broadband plan. Mobile DTV's one-to-many distribution model is far superior to the point-to-point methods used by streaming over cellular networks, and it is free so everyone can access it. Cisco's most recent visual networking index says mobile video will account for 66% of all mobile data by the year 2014. The broadband plan calls for recouping 300 megahertz of spectrum by 2015 and 500 by 2020. If we apply the Cisco data, a mandated mobile DTV tuner in every handset would provide video to everyone and represent 330 megahertz of spectrum savings. This is a both-and situation. Mobile DTV is good for the consumer, good for the public, and good for the broadband plan that powers so many other platforms that we deliver content on. Mobile DTV is a powerful part of creating and ensuring a competitive media landscape. It exemplifies the need for regulation that ensures local, free, over-the-air television from a diverse group of owners, as diverse as possible. It is vital to our nation's security, to our democracy, and to our society. A.J. Fletcher, the founder of Capital Broadcasting, said, "In the integrity and independence of the enlightened individual lies in the hope of our nation. To inform the public without bias or favor is the station's highest duty." The technologies available to us have vastly changed and improved since A.J. first made that statement so many decades ago. But it still rings true today, and there is no doubt that it can best be accomplished via free, over-the-air, local broadcasting, including the mobility of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matheny. Mr. Parsons?
As Bill mentioned earlier, my name is Travis Parsons, and I'm Senior Director of Business Development at SESME Corporation. I want to thank the panel, the FCC Media Bureau, for inviting me to sit on the panel, and the rest of the panelist members here that are all working to innovate and make sure that we continue to push things forward as it relates to the broadcast industry. Specifically, I'd like to address the role innovation is playing in helping traditional broadcasters reach their audiences and the advances that's taking place in technology that are spurring new content distribution opportunities. My company, SESME, is a great example of both of these topics, and it's thriving as a direct result of the digital transition. Before I get into this and talk in a little more detail about that, as well as some of the policies that are taking place and that I encourage the Commission to consider, it might make sense to take a step back and understand what SESME is and give you a little bit of a background on the formation of the company and what we're out there doing with consumers today. SESME, for those of you that are not aware, is a new, innovative, low-cost, more affordable television service that we've launched. And by using technology advances in both the broadcast and the broadband industries, we're able to deliver a service that at the end of the day is a replacement for cable and satellite. We allow viewers to have convenient access to the full diversity of programming voices. Content providers should not be limited in terms of how they get their programming out to consumers. SESME firmly believes, and this has been a part of our thinking from the very, very beginning. So with that being said, the company was founded nearly 4 years ago by Bruno Patti and Phil Weiser. Both entrepreneurs and veterans here in the Silicon Valley have started several companies between the two of them. And the vision of the company really evolved out of the frustration that was taking place with their current television service providers. That's the one bill in the home that's continued to climb over the last 20 years in terms of costs, but yet have we seen a better experience at the end of the day? And in our opinion, no, we haven't. So in the early days, we sat down and we decided if we were going to launch a television service, what would it look like? And let's do it from the consumer's perspective. And if you could do that, as with any great startup, we could start with a clean slate of paper and go out there and design the platform from the very beginning and design it properly. And when you look at some of the pillars that we were able to approach, and I'll go through each of these, we think that we've put a pretty compelling service out there for consumers that makes it a more rich and affordable experience for them as viewers. The first is that it would start around and revolve around on demand. And when I say on demand, meaning it allows consumers to watch what they want to watch when they want to watch it. Make it convenient for them. And if you're going to do that, we should also make it wireless. We've got this incredible infrastructure out there, the DTV transition that took place in the broadcast industry to the tune of $6+ billion that was spent on it. Let's leverage that. Let's take advantage of that in the ways that it should be. And as Ravi and both Sam had mentioned earlier, that is the most efficient way to deliver content to the masses and to the audiences. So if you can deliver this television service wirelessly into the home, it'll also allow for a simple self-install model. So with the SESME service, you take it out of the box, you connect it up to your TV, and you're up and running and watching television HD television in a matter of minutes, as opposed to having somebody come out to the home, truck rolls, laying cables all over your home, and creating fire hazards in terms of wires, for that matter. But in order to do this, you've got to have all the content that people want to watch, and you've got to have a comprehensive content lineup. So that's what we've done over the last several years, is gone out there and put those content relationships in place with the major studios, making sure that obviously all of the over-the-air channels are being received and picked up by our antenna. And it's worth noting what we've done is we've developed an indoor reception system that picks up all the over-the-air stations, and then we go out there and we put partnerships in place with the local broadcasters and license their excess spectrum or their spare capacity in order to deliver a majority of the cable network programming. So that, combined with the internet connection that comes into the home, that allows us to really create a hybrid architecture to deliver all the content that consumers want to watch. And more importantly, what it does is it actually gives content producers and content sources a new voice and a new way to get into the home, which is incredibly important. It's an opportunity where they may not have had traditional access via the cable or satellite services. Now they can go out there and they can, through SESME, they can either distribute the content potentially wirelessly over the broadcast network or do it over the broadband connection. So we're creating those new opportunities to do that. And then in addition, I don't think that any of us would say that there's a lack of content that's available out there. I think what people want to do is figure out what's relevant to them and have that content bubble up to the surface so that you can easily access it. And SESME is doing some unique things on the personalized side of things to enrich the service and make it that much stronger for you as an individual viewer. A couple of things with regards to this particular topic on the changing distribution channels and what we've been able to accomplish. Just a few thoughts with regards to policy that I would like or encourage the Commission to think about. A couple folks up here have mentioned spectrum efficiency and the fact that the broadcast infrastructure is the best way to distribute a majority of the content. And SESME firmly believes that. If you look at how we were designing our system back in the beginning, we looked at what viewers watched. And the fact of the matter is that well over 50% of all the content consumed still comes from all the over-the-air stations. ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, KAXA, like Ravi's station. The ability to go out there and access that, don't deny that. And then if you take a majority of the most popular cable network content, and you can distribute that wirelessly over the broadcast infrastructure and that DTV spectrum, you're all of a sudden being incredibly efficient about distribution. And if you complement that with the broadband connection that comes into the back of the home, now what you've done is you've taken two great technologies that are out there. It doesn't have to be an either or. They need to coexist and come together. And when you can do that, that's an opportunity to make sure that spectrum is being used in the most efficient manner possible. And it also allows for a system to go out there and make it more affordable for consumers at the end of the day. I talked about us being less expensive than cable and satellite. And one of the ways that we're able to do that is because we're able to leverage that infrastructure out there that broadcasters have invested in so heavily over the last number of years. And with our partnerships, we're able to help them unlock and tap into that spectrum to deliver a more compelling experience to consumers. The other thing that I'd like to bring up is the fact that SESME and broadcasters partnering together really help to bridge the digital divide. Because our service is affordable, there's no personal computer that's required. So SESME believes that a greater number of households will gain access to the internet video content. And because we utilize that home internet connection, we see more web-based video services coming onto the platform. The services are directly into the consumer's home and help bring more households into the digital era by providing both internet video and the traditional broadcast and cable network programming that they deserve and that they want. The other point that I'll bring up is the looming spectrum crisis. This has been an important factor in meeting wireless broadband demand. The wireless industry has asserted that there is a looming spectrum crisis out there due to exploding wireless demand. But there is little in the record about what the wireless industry can do to address this demand short of obtaining more spectrum. This is particularly peculiar given that based on the wireless industry's own predictions, spectrum reallocation will do little to address consumer demand. For example, AT&T believes that mobile data traffic will grow 300 times by 2018. But tripling the amount of commercial wireless spectrum means that only 1% of their demand problem is being solved. The Commission accordingly should be considering whether an ambitious nationwide broadcast spectrum reallocation can be justified if the benefit is so negligible. Given, as CTIA explains, that the kernel of the wireless industry's consumer demand problem is localized congestion, the Commission should maybe be factoring in the merits of localized solutions and giving that certainly some thoughts. More generally, the Commission should be considering whether technological advances like Wi-Fi, high-volume storage devices, pricing structure, and complementary services like SESME will mitigate the burden on wireless broadband networks and help address consumer demand. And the last important factor that I want to mention is licensee flexibility. The FCC licensees should have the flexibility to innovate and respond to always changing market demands and technology capabilities. A complementary hybrid service such as SESME, which delivers popular video programming by broadcast and less popular by broadband, reduces the load on wireless networks, and it helps wireless providers manage consumer demand. SESME can provide their service because broadcasters have the flexibility to utilize their spectrum and to participate in the hybrid network that makes the innovation and affordability possible. This is just but one example of the benefit that regulatory flexibility can offer to licensees and consumers alike. So in our opinion, never before has the broadcast industry presented such great potential. SESME helps broadcasters realize that full potential of their digital broadcast signal by reconnecting broadcasters directly with their viewers and creating new opportunities for the distribution of their content. SESME believes that use of the existing ATSC DTV infrastructure to provide advanced entertainment and information services is the best use of spectrum in the public interest. Once again, thank you for taking the time for allowing me to speak about SESME and how innovation and technology is spurring new content distribution opportunities, expanding broadcasters' audiences, and unlocking the full potential of broadcaster signals.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Mr. Pila?
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here today and to speak to important topics that apply to us as a citizenry, and certainly those of us representing businesses and the impact that these decisions have on us. By nature, I'm an entrepreneur. I dream about disrupting business models, and particularly old-line businesses that don't take early advantage of the opportunities before us. When I think of the early founding of this country, essentially this country was founded on a disruptive idea. For the first time in the history of the world, the notion was put forth that we derived our rights as human beings not from governments or churches, but we derived them direct from a higher power, God, in the case of the founders. And so this disruptive idea could only be preserved, it was believed by the founders, if there remained a free press, the belief being that it would be the tool by which the public were informed as to how their delegated powers were being utilized, and hence the eventual policies that the FCC considers and the ownership rules and other things, all intended to preserve a voice, an independent voice, such that the people remain informed and they have an opportunity to raise up and bring to balance the powers that they've delegated. In 1986, I founded one of the early search engine companies, a company called Folio, and our mantra at the time was something we called information democracy. In those early days, there were just a few digital online service providers, companies like LexisNexis, that we wanted to disrupt. Our customers were providers of digital data to those large online service providers who charged, on average, $100 to do a simple query. And to us, that was like a Berlin Wall that stood between the everyday man and journalists and researchers who had access to that trove of information. And that seems unbelievable today, given that we have broad and open access to content and those $100 searches, while maybe lawyers still pay for them, and some journalists, by and far, we can do searches today on Google and other search engines that surpass the capability of those early systems. So I think the questions that we address in this forum and others have less to do about information access as they do about the influence of the various distribution models and purveyors of that content, and particularly in this case at the local level. I don't think we'd disagree that the disenfranchised and virtually anyone can have a voice in our communities. When we look at the content that we access on a regular basis, as was referred by earlier comments, we still get most of our news from local sources. I no longer subscribe to a print newspaper myself because I'm able to quickly gather what I need on the internet or on my iPad, and consequently, when I look to national news sources, I'm usually getting that over television, though sometimes on the internet. And so our usage patterns are changing, yet the dominant voices in the local communities remain the local broadcast stations. And I want to address specifically, excuse me, the challenge that we have with television today as it relates to not just spectrum and ownership, but in terms of interactivity. As Eddie mentioned, the tremendous work and effort that is underway among newspapers to just stay alive in an adapting world such as they're dealing with. And one of the things that they've discovered is that the conversation that takes place around the news, the forums next to the news story, the reader comments, are in fact enriching the whole news gathering experience. It's essentially news is beginning the conversation now. In the world of television, we have a little different challenge in that it's not called a boob tube for nothing. We consume as Americans over 5 hours per day of television. It's all passive. There's no conversation that takes place in real time around the television as an integrated experience. Now, that isn't to say our behaviors aren't changing. In fact, when my children watch American Idol, they do what I call multi-viewing. They're watching American Idol on the main screen, but they have their laptops and their phones out. They're texting, they're posting updates to their Facebook accounts. They're watching YouTube videos. They're looking on IMDb. They're consuming all sorts of content, participating in a synchronized conversation. Well, television itself it can enable the conversation, but it doesn't synchronize it very well, meaning it doesn't allow us to hear each other's voices very well, and as a result, I think a lot of what has to ultimately happen for television to adapt and survive as a conduit of freedom is for it to figure out how to engage interactively. And I know that term interactive television has traditionally meant additional menus on your screen or ways to interact with programming. What I'm referring to, though, is what we as a society are adapting to among our social networks and interactions around the real-time conversation that we engage in while we're consuming content. And I believe that television has to play an important role eventually in doing that, and that technologies and companies like my own, i.TV, are striving to build platforms that allow us to engage in those conversations. One of those significant trends that I think sits on the table right now, my iPad. Tim Baharin last week at PC Magazine editorialized that the iPad may in fact finally liberate the television. A recent survey that was done of new iPad owners showed that 98% of iPad owners use their iPads while watching television. The Nielsen research study called the 3-Screen Study is finding that a lot of the interactivity around television is happening on these second and third screens, your laptops and your iPhones, and that a lot of that interaction is around the content that you're watching. So I believe a day of liberation is in fact upon us with these new devices and new services. And I think it will be a confluence of events that will give voice to the community that's consuming what was once purely a passive medium. Finally, as it relates to media ownership, I understand as a businessman the economies of scale that come through consolidation, particularly in a changing marketplace. As the advertising marketplace changes for newspapers, challenged by free services like Craigslist, to the new digital ad insertions created by FreeWheel and its platform, and enabling the various entities to now deliver what were traditionally commercials on any screen, not just the television screen. And as those pressures come to bear, I think what ultimately we have to be watchful of is, if all these voices multiply as we hope they will the dominant voices, those that traditionally have the quality of production and the reputation as our voices within the community, our watchdogs, will they in any way try to inappropriately influence the new interaction that they will face, meaning the voices that they've not been accustomed to having synchronized with their broadcast. In other words, the voices of those that might corroborate the stories that they're telling or things they're saying, but actually might refute them and contest them. And a lot of that behavior, I think, ultimately will determine whether or not the FCC and other governing bodies can consider the actual influence of those dominant historical bodies of news, particularly in other content, and whether or not those reins can be restricted as other new media platforms have voices of their own that maintain that or create for themselves that same influence. And so I think it's an exciting future. I think all of us here at the table play different roles in that future, and we believe that there will not only be triumphant reentry of the old media companies in these new platforms, but there will be a place for all of us to thrive, and particularly as a society to benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pilo. And finally, Mr. Westergren.
Thank you. Thanks to the Commission for including Pandora in the conversation today. My name is Tim Westergren. I'm the founder of Pandora. I founded the company 10 years ago. I thought what I'd do is just talk a little bit about how Pandora works and Pandora's place in this really, really fast evolving digital music and radio landscape, and then just a quick piece on sort of our own experience in the regulatory world. I come here as an enormous champion and cheerleader for government intervention for reasons that will maybe be clear after I speak. So Pandora is a personalized radio service. It allows listeners to create their own radio stations, to type in a song or artist they like and hit go, and listen to a stream tailored very specifically to their musical preferences. It's available initially principally on computers, but now increasingly on mobile devices, connected TVs, and soon in cars. We have over 50 million listeners in the U.S., and that number grows by about 90,000 a day, all entirely by word of mouth, as it has since day one. It's powered by something called the Music Genome Project, which is an enormous hand-built musical taxonomy. It's a database of songs. There are about 750,000 now that have each been listened to and analyzed by a trained musician along close to 400 attributes per song. So it's kind of like musical DNA. And it allows us to build stations to make sort of connections based on musicological proximity. And one of the most important characteristics of that system is that it's completely blind to popularity. So when Pandora constructs stations, which it does in real time, and it picks which songs to play after you've typed in U2 or Bruce Springsteen or Bach, the songs we choose to sequence are based just on musical similarity, not on the stature or income or history or sort of cultural importance or lack thereof of the artist. So it's a completely democratic playing field that gives equal opportunity to every song in our collection, 70% of which belong to artists who are not signed to a major label. So I think it's a profoundly powerful distribution mechanism. I think there are three principal benefits of this type of service. The first is for listeners. I think we can all relate to the problem we have, especially as you get older, meaning get out of college. You develop a harder and harder time finding new music. You don't have those 2 hours to browse at the record store or the few remaining record stores. You're not surrounded by people offering up new suggestions for you. And as you get older, radio becomes less and less relevant because you're not part of the important targeted demographic. So for listeners, I think it's profoundly powerful. I think it's the reason Pandora is growing as fast as it is. Second big benefit is for artists. Again, as I mentioned, we have 90,000 artists in our collection. Those range from big stars that we all know to hobbyists who have recorded CDs on the weekends and submitted them to Pandora and happen to have a real talent. And 70% of these artists are not on a major label. So these are artists and these are songs that are not appearing on any other form of radio. So it's a wonderful promotional mechanism. The third piece, which I think is tremendously beneficial for artists, is that in our business, we share a substantial portion of our revenue, which comes from advertising, with the performers. Last year, Pandora pulled in about $50 million of revenue, and $30 million of that was paid out in royalties that were shared equally between artists and their labels. So it's actually giving artists access to the world of advertising revenue, which historically hasn't been true in broadcast radio. So it's really, I think, opening up an enormous sort of monetization opportunity. It's our hope that as Pandora grows, that we might be a catalyst for building the equivalent of a musician's middle class by distributing advertising revenue and providing this wonderfully democratic form of promotion. So I think there's a lot that's a great benefit to this form of listening. Pandora is just one of many companies that are taking advantage of the web's ability to stream this enormous diversity of content using unicast technology, the ability to talk one-to-one with a listener. The last point I'll make is around regulation. Pandora operates under a federal statute called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that gives us the permission to play all the music that we play. It's one piece of paper that we sign, and that makes us fully legal. As part of that license, we pay a royalty called a performance fee, which is distributed to a company called Sound Exchange that in turn pays it out to artists and labels. A couple years ago, that royalty was dramatically hiked through a pretty misguided decision on the part of an arbitration committee. And absent really any other recourse, we actually appealed directly to Congress through our listeners and to those regulatory bodies and essentially said this is a really unfair result. We need this to be reexamined and renegotiated. And there was congressional intervention. And ultimately, through the government, we got this fixed to a point where Pandora could survive. It remains a really, really unlevel playing field. If you consider radio, the three principal forms of radio, broadcast, which is obviously the dominant form, accounts for over 90% of all listening, sort of cable and satellite, XM Sirius and company, and internet radio as the three principal forms. In the case of performance royalties, so royalties paid to artists, I explained that Pandora paid about 60% of its revenue last year in that royalty. The cable and satellite providers paid about 15%, and broadcast radio paid nothing. So it's our belief that artists should be paid, and we hope that at some point there will be some greater degree of parity. But I think it's certainly more important than anything is I think internet radio has a vital role to play in sort of the ongoing health of the music ecosystem writ large. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Westergren, and thanks to all of our panelists for your extremely well thought out and valuable comments. We're going to now turn to the question and answer period, and joining me and Bill Lake to ask questions are Cherise Smith, legal advisor to FCC Chairman Julius Genachowski, and Rosemary Harold, who is legal media advisor to Commissioner Rob McDowell. And I'd like to start with the first question and stick with you, Mr. Westergren, if I can. What does Pandora see as its market and its competitors? Do you see yourself competing for listeners and subscribers with satellite or with broadcast radio?
Sure. I think probably the simplest way to answer that is we're competing for the listener's listener hour. Probably more so in the radio space as opposed to the CD or music you own space. Historically, the average American listens to about 20 hours of music a week, and about 85% of that has historically and continues to be radio. So I'd say radio is where we consider ourselves operating. broadcast is obviously the dominant player in that. But with the growing ubiquity of internet radio, the fact that you can take your iPhone and plug it into your car dashboard, or that it's integrated now into cars. Ford is launching a car this year with a voice-activated, embedded version of Pandora in the car that you can get on your Blu-ray DVD player or a connected home device, means we live alongside all forms of radio and consider that our direct competition.
Do you have figures for what percentage of use of Pandora comes from cars or takes place at cars?
Sure. So to date, the use of Pandora in cars is informal. It's somebody taking a phone and a $2 adapter and plugging it into the aux jack in their head unit. That's not something that we can monitor. But anecdotally, about 50% of people who own iPhones report having used it in the car. I would say probably, though, currently the actual usage of Pandora in a car is a relatively small percent. We expect that to grow over the coming years. It'll take some time because people don't buy new cars very often. But it's 50% of radio, so over time that'll grow substantially.
How far are we, do you think, from seeing receivers in cars that can receive internet radio?
Well, Ford will start selling them this year. There's actually a working Ford Fiesta with this as part of the feature, one of the features. I think you'll begin seeing models adopt them pretty aggressively in the next couple of years.
Okay, one last question, and it deals with spectrum. You know, we've heard our panelists talk about the appropriateness of broadband or the appropriateness of the broadcast spectrum to bring video and audio to listeners and viewers. Obviously, Pandora would be using the broadband, and it would be, rather than point to multipoint, it would be point to point. Mm-hmm. Assuming that Pandora's subscribership grows greatly in the future, where will the bandwidth come from?
That's a good question, and I think our general hypothesis about broadband is that the supply for it will keep up with demand. It might lag it some. We're a relatively actually thin user of capacity, believe it or not. Codecs have become super efficient, the AAC Plus and so low bitrate codecs that deliver a nice sounding audio stream mean that we're actually not as big a hog of bandwidth as people think. I think the real challenge for networks is more the bursts, the kind of live streaming of the Super Bowl, the Final Four, the sort of exploding video, as opposed to kind of steady, low-bit usage like Pandora.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll ask the next set of questions. Pretty much everyone on the panel has talked about forays into some of the new media products, whether it be mobile, internet, Kindle, you name it. And as we just, struggle with what to do with our media ownership rules, we need to really be thoughtful of kind of what the future holds and how that plays into some of the more traditional media that we have dealt with so far. I think part of that comes into advertising revenue, monetization. And so I'd love to, and this question is pretty much for all of the panelists, ask you about what you're seeing as far as advertising on some of the new models, whether it be internet, mobile, or Kindle. And I guess the second part of that would be, at what point would you see kind of these new models either be a substitute, if at all, ever, I guess?
The actual pressures we're seeing are not that the advertising models are changed that much, because they were designed for, for us, we focus mostly on video and television, which is predominantly for branding as opposed to direct marketing. So the intent of the message is to make people aware of something. So in that case, the driving need is to be able to do it in a way that works smoothly across whatever the device is, as opposed to having to do it specially per device. Because as soon as you have to do it different per device, you took what was a large audience and broke it into just the iPad piece or just the connected TV piece, and that suddenly makes it many small audiences, which really, really deteriorates the value. So it's not so much that the model itself, in terms of how to charge for it to the advertiser, is so different. It's the details of how to execute it across wherever the consumer wants to watch it should be simple, and it's not. And that, to our point, sort of is partly a policy thing between the parties involved about who wants to do what with each other, and in some cases a technical issue because different things work in different places. And then it does need to get measured and accounted for appropriately, because if people don't know what they bought, they won't pay for it. So we haven't really witnessed people still want to buy the closer or Sports Center, and they want to buy it wherever it's being consumed. From the advertiser perspective, it's just a lot of the disruption that's occurred has made that physically difficult to do and sort of accounting difficult to do. So it's really been more of a hurdle issue than a change issue. And one thing we've seen sort of historically is that if I spend $1 to reach my audience, on a lot of traditional mediums, maybe I spent 10 cents to physically get it to happen. And when the internet started in its early days, 97, 96, if I spent $1 to reach an audience, I spent 40, 50 cents to get it to happen. And that constrains everything on growth because it's too inefficient. So most of the pressures we've been trying to address and we've been seeing are to get the effort of advertising down so that it's easy to do wherever the consumer chooses to watch it. It hasn't changed drastically in how I want to execute it, measure it, and buy it. It's just very hard to do what I used to do.
So I think to add to that, the operations associated with delivering advertising to lots of different platforms. I think solutions like FreeWheel, there are a number of, different types of solutions that make the operations relatively seamless and manageable. And so at Current, we do quite a bit of multi-platform distribution of our content, but we also hold back much of our best content that we invest the most amount of money in behind the subscription wall that our cable and satellite providers and distributing partners manage. And so one of the fascinating things that we're about to see is the notion of TV everywhere and what that means, and people have sort of read about it, and the cable and satellite guys are starting to really, really talk about that. But when you take a step back and you look at the amount of very high quality original content being produced by, not just the broadcast networks, but really by the cable and satellite industry, it's astounding, the quality and the focus of the original content being produced, and really the economics of producing and distributing that content are very, very challenging to support on a free ad-supported model. So that's why I think, TV everywhere, whether that's, the Comcasts and Dishes and DirecTV, or the Apples, or the Hulus, or others that are really trying to get at the same coin. I think you're going to see more and more of the best content behind subscription walls. And, it's going to be very, very interesting to watch.
I might just add in on that as well. I think it's not necessarily a substitute that's going to take place, at least in the short term, but it's looking at new models that will help enhance the existing one or the current one. So our broadcast partners, or those that have partnered with SESME, what we're doing is we're creating new revenue streams, some of those in the form of driving higher CPMs and the new advertising content that they're able to display. We've developed something called a zone. So think of a broadcaster station zone. So here in the local Bay Area, it could be KPIX, which would be the local CBS station. They then have an opportunity where they own that television and the content on that television for as long as that consumer stays on their zone. And the opportunity to sell local advertising, to enhance the localized media that's out there, and distribute library content, whatever it may be, all revolve around bringing that consumer onto their station, all about their brand, and in the end, really driving higher CPMs and more advertising opportunities.
Well, I was going to put Mr. Hartenstein actually on the spot. I'd love to hear what you think from the LA Times perspective. Are you seeing advertising picking up on the internet, mobile, and some of the other areas that you guys have been moving into over the last couple of years? Is it stagnating or is it declining?
As we develop and open up our new channels of content distribution, we begin to see some incremental revenues coming from those. If you've been watching the media, not nearly to the magnitude with which we're losing advertising revenues from the traditional run of print advertising model. But to an advertiser, I think many of them are beginning to shift away from purely a CPM type of model and trying to understand a little bit more about the quality of the targeting of the audience. And we are looking to these other distribution medium as we look at micro zoning, going to the smaller audiences that we're able to do in terms of identifying our audience to deliver a higher quality prospect, a lead, and the internet and mobile devices who have a return path, unlike a pure broadcast model in television or over-the-air radio or the printed product, in terms of interacting with the customer, can actually deliver very meaningful numbers to how many people looked at that ad, looked at that space, and started to interact with it. So that's the model we're going to. Unfortunately, we're going at it in a medium where the vast populace has been conditioned to, well, it's on the internet, it therefore must be free, and get rid of that banner. So we have to do it in more creative ways. We're optimistic about that because I think one of the things that we bring and one of the things that we deliver is a trusted brand name, a trusted source of journalism, so that the information that we are transporting and conveying along with the advertising clients that we have is one that is going to be of high utility, of high use, and hopefully one where people will gravitate to.
Thank you.
I've got a... Oh, sure.
In the ComScore chart, advertising on, building an online advertising business is like pushing a big rock up a hill right now. It's a function both of scale, just sort of raw scale. It's also a function of an industry, advertising agencies, and the whole ecosystem around them that's learning about this stuff. So there's a very active kind of reorientation happening within agencies and their customers that they serve to understand how this works, the new formats, rich media, these products that change every few months, sort of a new format, a new idea. And so you're educating an industry about this as well. We have 190 employees, and 90 of them do nothing but sell for a company our size. And I think that's not atypical on the web.
Much of our best content that we invest the most amount of money in behind the subscription wall that our cable and satellite providers and distributing partners manage. And so one of the fascinating things that we're about to see is the notion of TV everywhere and what that means. And people have sort of read about it, and the cable and satellite guys are starting to really, really talk about that. But when you take a step back and you look at the amount of very high quality original content being produced by not just the broadcast networks, but really by the cable and satellite industry, it's astounding, the quality and the focus of the original content being produced, and really the economics of producing and distributing that content are very, very challenging to support on a free ad-supported model. So that's why I think TV everywhere, whether that's the Comcast and Dishes and DirecTV, or the Apples, or the Hulus, or others that are really trying to get at the same coin. I think you're going to see more and more of the best content behind subscription walls, and it's going to be very, very interesting to watch.
I might just add in on that as well. I think it's not necessarily a substitute that's going to take place, at least in the short term, but it's looking at new models that will help enhance the existing one or the current one. So our broadcast partners, or those that have partnered with SESME, what we're doing is we're creating new revenue streams, some of those in the form of driving higher CPMs and the new advertising content that they're able to display. We've developed something called a zone. So think of a broadcaster station zone. So here in the local Bay Area, it could be KPIX, which would be the local CBS station. They then have an opportunity where they own that television and the content on that television for as long as that consumer stays on their zone. And the opportunity to sell local advertising, to enhance the localized media that's out there, and distribute library content, whatever it may be, all revolve around bringing that consumer onto their station, all about their brand, and in the end, really driving higher CPMs and more advertising opportunities.
Well, I was going to put Mr. Hartenstein actually on the spot. I'd love to hear what you think from the LA Times perspective. Are you seeing advertising picking up on the internet, mobile, and some of the other areas that you guys have been moving into over the last couple of years? Is it stagnating or is it declining?
As we develop and open up our new channels of content distribution, we begin to see some incremental revenues coming from those. If you've been watching the media, not nearly to the magnitude with which we're losing advertising revenues from the traditional run-of-print advertising model. But to an advertiser, I think many of them are beginning to shift away from purely a CPM type of model and trying to understand a little bit more about the quality of the targeting of the audience. And we are looking to these other distribution medium as we look at micro zoning, going to the smaller audiences that we're able to do in terms of identifying our audience to deliver a higher quality prospect, a lead. And the internet and mobile devices who have a return path, unlike a pure broadcast model in television or over-the-air radio or the printed product, in terms of interacting with the customer, can actually deliver very meaningful numbers to how many people looked at that ad, looked at that space, and started to interact with it. So that's the model we're going to. Unfortunately, we're going at it in a medium where the vast populace has been conditioned to, well, it's on the internet, it therefore must be free, and get rid of that banner. So we have to do it in more creative ways. We're optimistic about that because I think one of the things that we bring and one of the things that we deliver is a trusted brand name, a trusted source of journalism, so that the information that we are transporting and conveying along with the advertising clients that we have is one that is going to be of high utility, of high use, and hopefully one where people will gravitate to.
Thank you.
I've got a... Oh, sure.
In the ComScore chart, advertising on, building an online advertising business is like pushing a big rock up a hill right now. It's a function both of scale, just sort of raw scale. It's also a function of an industry, advertising agencies, and the whole ecosystem around them that's learning about this stuff. So there's a very active kind of reorientation happening within agencies and their customers that they serve to understand how this works, the new formats, rich media, these products that change every few months, sort of a new format, a new idea. And so you're educating an industry about this as well. We have 190 employees, and 90 of them do nothing but sell for a company our size. And I think that's not atypical on the web.
It sort of was originally this way, sort of pre-internet, and then the first form of the internet changed it, which was many of the sources of content got aggregated by various front ends, and the front ends developed the sales channels and packaged new things and sold to the advertising community, and they got enormous scale and built their, those businesses, the Yahoos and such. What we've seen happen, at least with the kind of content we deal with, which is more of the broadcast and cable television material, is that the product that the advertiser sometimes or usually buys is SportsCenter or The Closer or a baseball game or what have you. So it's not so much the destination as the show. So this is perhaps more of a television issue. And the things have inverted back to what they used to be traditionally, which is the television network may distribute its show in many locations, which may be on many devices and wires and across numerous other companies, but they still look at it as a holistic audience and they still execute it that way and sell it themselves. So that's sort of a shift back to what it used to be. You're sort of re-aggregating your audience across where it now is, as opposed to it only being in a few places. So we've seen that a lot in the last 2 years.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks. I've got a question for any of the panelists who'd like to weigh in. And I think Mr. Pilo has already touched on pretty much what I'm going to ask others about, although you're welcome to weigh in again. I'm asking about two related concepts that were much talked about back when I was a journalist in the pre-internet Stone Age days, agenda setting and gatekeeping. For example, when the FCC first imposed its newspaper broadcast ownership ban back in the 1970s, policymakers then expressed concern about the position of those media outlets in controlling the flow of news and information to the public through the stories they chose to cover or not cover, and through the sources they chose to interview or not interview. Today, however, it appears that whatever power traditional media have had to gatekeep or set the news agenda has changed in the digital online world. Do you have a view on this? And if so, please tell us why.
Don't all jump at one time.
I'll go ahead. I certainly wish that we could really hold sway with agenda setting and be a gatekeeper. I think that's, the Stone Age you referred to is probably only a few years ago. But I think as clearly the largest publisher or publishing entity in Los Angeles, we have overlapping publications that come in. There's a blurry line between the Orange County and L.A. County line, much the same as there is with the Daily News that is in the San Fernando Valley. I think our ability to agenda set, while we can attempt to and cover the news that we think is important, in no way is I think indicative of our being able to move the people, create an atmosphere where by a single endorsement of an issue or a candidate, we can be a kingmaker, so to speak. It's literally, I think, the wild, wild west out there. There are so many voices out there now. We have to struggle to continue to do the job that we, began to do 128 years ago, which is to create quality journalism. And as I said before, that's very labor intensive. It's very resource intensive. Those journalists don't do it for free, nor should they. And what we are attempting to do is find as many different audiences as we can. Quick, tell me, anybody know a 20-year-old or under that reads a newspaper? No. Yet they're all very well informed. They know what's going on. So we have to find our audiences through the appliance, through the device of their choice, the ones that they're used to seeing. And hence that's why we are going with RSS feeds and iPhone apps and iPad apps and everything that we can think of to expand our audiences and to talk to more people like that. We combine and use the resources of a KTLA newsroom, of our affiliate in San Diego, Fox 5 there, to try to gather and create more news and disseminate it through all the channels, thinner and thinner as those channels are becoming.
I was going to say that I think the gatekeeping that we it's probably a little different type of gatekeeping than you initially were asking about, but the gatekeeping that kind of concerns us is with respect to the distribution gatekeeping. And when there is not a level playing field or the threat of of an unlevel playing field with respect to how our content may be distributed. And specifically, I'm thinking of things like net neutrality. I'm thinking of things like when there is a single company that may own competitive brands, both from a distribution standpoint as well as a broadcast standpoint. And they are now, certainly incented to give the companies that they own, the content creations that they own, preferential treatment. And I think that unlevel type of playing field is probably the gate that we worry about most.
If I can interject, I think Sam's right, though I think there already is an unlevel playing field right now. I mean, full-power TV stations, for example, were issued licenses 60, 70 years ago. If it were not for the Carter administration jumping in the late 70s to facilitate low power, we wouldn't have any diversity whatsoever in the way we reach our audiences. And for example, KAXT, I mean, how in the world does a little station like us survive? There are all these voids in the community. I mean, there's 1 million Filipinos between Sacramento and here in the Bay Area. They don't have one single channel of free content. There's about 500,000 South Asians. There's no channel for them. There's 250,000 Vietnamese. There's no channel for them. We had 1 hour on an ethnic channel on Saturday afternoon. That's it. And the cost was so prohibitive to get on these channels. They were charging tens of thousands of dollars for a 30-second spot or for a half-an-hour show. So when you talk about since you're a journalist yourself, I mean, I think as consolidation has occurred, we have more groupthink. I mean, I'm still actively working for a major corporate conglomerate here in Northern California on the weekends. I mean, I've kind of blown my cover today, but I'm still working actively as a journalist. And I see what goes on. You know, I cover stories on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. I'm the only reporter in the newsroom. I called in sick a couple weeks ago. Guess what happened? Nobody covered the news. Nobody covered the news. That's what's happening. And so I understand this whole thing about economies of scale. I mean, it makes sense in theory, but guess what? When you own 25 stations and you don't have enough boots on the ground here locally, they just put on the same homogenized content that they get from all parts of the country. They just put filler in, and they're not covering the community. And look, one big thing I want to mention here, since we are in a very diverse community, and it's something that I've noticed here in the last year, where's the enterprise journalism in communities of color? What I've noticed is, you know, a lot of these small little newspapers that might be in Hindi or Vietnamese or Tagalog, a lot of these guys are small businesses, and they can't actually go after the hucksters in those communities because they're running a business. And if you go after the concert promoter that's ripping people off, if you're going after small businesses that are ripping people off in those communities, those are often the businesses that have enough money to support your little newspaper. And so basically what you have is a bunch of press releases put together with advertising in that native language quite often. And so you don't see real enterprise journalism because there's no, ethnic media is on their own. I mean, we haven't talked about ethnic media whatsoever. They're totally on their own. And so I think there's a real void there in ethnic journalism, and I don't see mainstream media do it. I mean, look, I've worked for pretty much every station here in Northern California. We don't really cover communities of color. I mean, today, how many local broadcasters, or for that matter, newspaper folks are here? I saw Channel 7 here because they do cover issues like this, and I respect the Channel 7 newsroom, KGO, quite a bit. But otherwise, you don't see, I mean, how many people actually heard about this symposium? I mean, this crowd is sadly about only a third full. I mean, every single broadcaster should have been promoting this event today. And this is what's going on. They don't want to get the true message out there to the masses. So I think there's a real disconnect going on. And nobody wants to speak about it, but I'm happy to, since, as a journalist, I see it's just as a matter of fairness. And I feel very fortunate that I'm in this position now where we can, at least help some of these communities get access to the airwaves. Because previous to our little thing at KAXT, I mean, there was no access whatsoever.
Thank you very much, panelists. Now, as we transition to the open public comment period, I will recognize a small number of individuals who were asked to speak at this point in order to keep the panel to a more manageable size. Each of these individuals will be limited to 2 minutes, and again, I ask them to adhere strictly to this time limit so that everyone in the audience will have an opportunity to be heard. First, we're delighted to have with us Melanie Fink from the American Red Cross.
Can you hear me?
Morning.
My name is Melanie Finke. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for the American Red Cross and Bay Area chapter. We are one of the largest Red Cross chapters in the country, serving the people of the Bay Area, about 4.5 million people. Every year, we help about 2,000 people within our 6 counties who have nowhere to go and no place to stay because their house has been damaged by a fire or a flood or another disaster. We also work to ensure that the Bay Area is as prepared as possible for a disaster, and we train about 700,000 people a year. The local media is a really strong and valuable partner for us in getting the word out, both with how people can get prepared for disaster, as well as information that's very essential for people to have during disaster. I've been on assignment in other parts of the country, and hopefully we will not have an experience here where a major disaster hits, like an earthquake. But if we do, the local media is the way that we can tell people how they can get the help that they need, and also for us to tell the people who aren't affected how they can help. I think one of the most amazing things that you see during disaster is the thousands and thousands of people who want to help the people that have been hurt. We saw that earlier this year with Haiti. Here in the Bay Area, we had to open a call center, and every time a media story hit, we had hundreds of people calling in. Out of the Bay Area alone, we sent millions of dollars to Haiti, and that's largely in part due to the word that was sent out through the local media, partnering with the Red Cross to get that word out. So we know that a major disaster will hit here, and we know that the media will be working with us as partners when that happens, and also continuing to work with us to get the community prepared before then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll invite to the microphone Tracy Rosenberg, Executive Director of the San Francisco-based Media Alliance.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon, and thank you for coming here to have this hearing in the Bay Area. We're happy to have you here. I think one thing that is obvious, but can certainly be said again, is that, societies are not well served by an echo chamber. If you have 2 or 3 primary sources of news and information and you have them on 5 or 7 or 11 or 33 different platforms, in fact, you still only have 2 or 3 sources of information. We are finding statistically that about 67% of online encounters are with large legacy media sites. In other words, rather than watching CNN on television, people are going to the internet and bringing up CNN. So an important point to recognize here is they are not receiving news and information from an alternate source. They are not receiving a wider, more diverse, more enriching information diet. They are simply switching platforms from one to the other to the other. Those 67% of people are making a choice, whether they're making that choice entirely freely or they're making that choice because they're just not sure where else they can go on the internet to receive alternate sources of information. There's another 20 to 30% of the population that's not making that choice at all, and they're not making that choice because they're not online. Now, a few of them may be scared of technology. That's possible. A whole bunch of them can't afford it, and a whole bunch of them, for literacy and language issues, probably aren't choosing to do it. I want to sort of echo Mr. Kapoor's point, which is information for people at the fringes is critical. They are already people who have more trouble getting information from the existing sources. They are already people who are living closer to the margin. They are already people who have a significant need to find out to access support and resources and knowledge about the place that they are living. They are not the people whose information diet we want to further restrict as regulators. We've had a fair bit of media consolidation the last couple of years. The FCC knows this. Statistically, it's done a couple of things. We have less media outlets owned by women and minorities than we ever did. Most are carrying much larger rates of debt, therefore making the process of being in business more expensive, not less expensive. And number 3, we have 25% less news on average. So the question is, do we want more platforms and less news, or do we want more news? And I would ask you as regulators to pursue the goal of more news. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Elliot Troshinsky, President and General Manager, Hearst television stations, KCRA Sacramento, KQCA Stockton.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us here today. I'm Elliot Trushinsky, President and General Manager, and I would like to just echo some of the comments that Mr. Hartenstein and Mr. Matheny talked about this morning. Local broadcasters are also called the new media. We are leveraging our news product across multiple platforms, not just on television, but also on the web, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. We want to provide local news and information video on mobile devices as well. Television has always been and always will be a valued part of the video ecosystem. We also agree that the current rules prohibiting cross-ownership of a television station and newspaper in the same market are an impediment to achieving economic efficiencies in the journalistic enterprise. While originally intended to serve the public interest, it's arguably having the opposite effect. Would the public in Denver have been better off with a local broadcaster owning the Rocky Mountain News rather than having the paper close its doors altogether? We think so. We also believe that the government should not stand in the way of broadcasters who look for ways to have more efficient operations so that they could offer more news and public affairs programming to our communities. For example, having the ability to own 2 television stations, KCRA and KQCA in Sacramento, we're able to offer almost 50 hours of local programming and news information per week and amortize the costs over both stations. We believe we can better serve our communities by developing new, innovative, and economically efficient ways to disseminate local news and information with strategic partners and utilizing multiple platforms. Thank you very much.
And finally, Anzio Williams, News Director, KCRA Sacramento.
Thank you for inviting us here today. As a news director of 2 television stations in Sacramento, I would say we're much just like our partners who showed up here from the American Red Cross. We consider ourselves public servants. We are quite often the first place that people turn to when there is an emergency, and we certainly feel the obligation to make sure that we're there when our local community needs us. So we certainly feel like that when the community needs us, that it's our responsibility to be there. As information providers, we're currently partners already with, we provide video for local newspapers. We also provide information for local radio stations. We're also partnering with other websites in terms of the information that we gather. As the largest news organization in Northern California, what we've found is that there may be a lot of different platforms out there where people are getting their information, but the information is still coming from several sources. And we're happy to say that we're one of those sources where folks are getting that information from, and we take that very serious. We are using all of the platforms that many of you guys have mentioned here today, including Facebook, Twitter, email alerts. And this is not just for things such as car accidents and house fires. The Hearst television stations has been honored by the Walter Cronkite Award for our political coverage for the last 8 years, and that is something that we're proud of. So we're not just talking about providing car accidents and the latest house fires. We're talking about providing people with information that to make decisions on who they're going to vote for. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that our communities have taken a more serious approach to their politics and to voting. So, and I would just end by saying that I think it would certainly be a benefit to require or mandate that all mobile devices have the ability to be able to receive television signals, as it will continue to be important for our community to get information when they need it. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. We'll now turn to the open mic portion of the program. If you're interested in making a comment or asking a question at this point, please just line up at the microphone. I would ask you to please identify yourself by name and any affiliation, and please limit any comments to 2 minutes. Thank you. We have a record that we're preparing. You should know that if you are anonymous, that may make it more difficult for us to rely on any information in our proceeding. But if you'd like not to refrain from identifying yourself, please feel free.
My name is Annie Folger. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Peninsula Community Media Center. We operate 5 public, educational, and government, or PEG, community cable TV access channels, serving Palo Alto, East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Atherton, and Stanford for over 20 years. PEG channels are becoming the go-to place for local information. Now, more than ever, local communities are turning to PEG channels for local information as media consolidation continues and local information is replaced by the 24-hour cable news cycle. PEG channels are an important alternative to the many broadcast and cable TV channels that are owned by a handful of mega media corporations. PEG channels deliver the constitutional guarantee of freedom of expression. Community media centers help local citizens create independent media to air on our local PEG channels and to publish on the internet. PEG channels deliver unique communications capabilities both for individuals and nonprofits. Last year, 756 TV programs were produced at our facility by a richly diverse community, and 97 local nonprofits, schools, and community organizations used our channels to get their messages out in a variety of creative ways. PEG channels deliver open and transparent government. Our gavel-to-gavel coverage of government meetings in our 4 cities totaled well over 2,000 hours last year. We produced 334 city hall and school board meetings live on our government channels. Is anyone watching, you might ask? Several years ago, a survey revealed that 67% of our viewers watch public meetings regularly or sometimes. In addition, we now provide archiving services. Each meeting is indexed and archived by agenda item and made available on the web, allowing citizens to easily find and view their items of interest. Our community center is committed to providing valuable voter resources before each election. We produce candidate forums in partnership with the League of Women Voters. We play them back on our channels, and we index them on the internet so viewers can watch particular segments of their choosing. Our website gets many more hits just prior to Election Day than at any other time of the year. Community media centers and PEG channels help fill the need for strong, independent local media. PEG channels are devoted to localism and diversity. Community media centers and PEG channels deserve to be protected and supported. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ruth Robertson, and I'm with the Raging Grannies, which is a local activist group of older women, and we're concerned about free speech and other social justice issues. I want to thank the FCC for coming here today, and I want you to know that I listened very carefully to what the businessman/journalist had to say today, and I have here the written testimony of Eddie Hartenstein. Thank you for leaving that long copy out there. What I hear you're saying sounds very much like businessmen first and journalists second. I appreciate that you want the government not to intervene with your right to do business, but in fact, the FCC's mandate is to protect the public interest and to provide for a variety and diversity and not be concerned about your bottom line. Sorry about that. Last year, the Raging Grannies, 2 years ago, the Raging Grannies were here about internet neutrality. The internet is very much on everybody's mind these days. I want to say that the Comcast-NBC merger would be disastrous for the public interest, and I will stop my comments at that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Fisher. I work with Ms. Folger at the Mid-Peninsula Community Media Center as the Youth Services Coordinator. In my position, I have the opportunity to facilitate our Youth Advisory Council. The most profound connection I have to this debate about media ownership is my interaction with these youth and being able to see the discussion through their eyes. In discussions about media ownership, it's very difficult for them to see some of the issues that arise through the increased concentration of media ownership. The two reasons for this are that, one, they haven't known anything different, And 2, their technology-savvy generation confuses the fact that they have a large quantity of media sources available with the idea that they have access to a diverse array of media. As Mayor Burt stated, we are in close proximity to many of the new media sources, which distracts us from the actual debate here. The inordinate amount of media sources out there creates an illusion of access and diversity while content is becoming more narrow and regulated. As the number of channels and media options have grown over the past 20 years, the number of media owners has inversely dropped. 1,000 channels owned by 5 corporations is not an achievement in variety. At this rate, the next generation's youth will have one source of news that will have its agenda dictated by the highest bidder. Advertising and corporate influence are increasingly pervading every type of media we consume, mainstream network channels to radio, and now to YouTube and even independent blogs and journals. Places that used to be a refuge are now inundating us with marketing messages, and the most vulnerable demographic is youth. PEG TV is now literally the only source of media that is completely commercial-free, where children can watch a 30-minute program without being manipulated into thinking they need to buy violent toys or unhealthy food. With the consolidation of media ownership and cross-ownership between media sources and profit-making corporations, we can't even say there's a diversity in these harmful messages. As a representative of PEG TV and a strong supporter of having access to free media, meaning access without being sold a product or sold a political agenda, I urge you to protect public access and allow us to continue to provide this refuge for our viewers.
Thank you very much.
Oh, hi. My name is Gail Sredanovic. I'm a retired teacher, a member of the Raging Grannies, and also of the Democracy for America San Mateo County Club. And I would like to mention that I'm surprised that there's nobody here from public television or public radio. I'm surprised that there are so few people here, that so few people knew about this. And I'm also surprised that no one has mentioned the word citizen or the word voter. It is my experience that the media, the public media that are controlled by a few corporations often provide very defective reporting. I've been following several issues and on many occasions was appalled at the way the dominant media seem to be stenographers for the powerful voices in Washington. And there's a tremendous tendency to parrot one another so that the same language appears over and over again. And a few powerful people are allowed to frame issues in ways that distort the whole thing, so that someone who is on a worldwide basis absolutely a centrist is labeled radical or extreme. And I'm also horrified on many occasions, even in my favorite public stations, that panels are very skewed. They are supposed to give the appearance of covering a wide spectrum, but in fact they cover an extremely narrow spectrum. And the media are very much tilted and dominated by a few opinions and a few voices that get repeated over and over again. So I would say what we don't need is more consolidation. And by the way, I noticed nobody's mentioned Comcast, or only as a member of the public, but no one on the panel mentioned. I think that's why we're here today. And so stand up for the public, stand up for the voters, and don't allow further consolidation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sarah Steffens. I'm with California Media Workers Guild. That's a newspaper guild local here in the Bay Area. Over the last couple of years, we've lost hundreds of journalism jobs here in the Bay Area. Excuse me. We've seen a lot of consolidation here already. Media News Corporation owns much of the newspapers here in the area now. And when they come in and when they're pitching consolidation, it's often a message about how this is going to benefit the public, how the resources will be richer and deeper and there will be more news. But our experience has been the opposite. Our newsrooms have been cut by a third, in some cases a half, and those aren't journalists that are going to other new media jobs. They're just unemployed, and the work that they're doing is no longer covered. There's no single journalist here in the Bay Area employed anymore to cover my former beat, poverty and social services. We've seen cuts of beats that used to be considered core parts of the news business: transportation, crime, courts, education. We understand that the news industry has to remain profitable. Journalists have taken furloughs and pay cuts to try to keep their over-leveraged companies afloat. But we believe in the end, cuts and consolidations are not going to be the answer to the problems of the news business. We think it probably has a lot to do with the reinvestment in journalism. And we hope the FCC agrees with us there that the public good here, the thing we've always been selling is investment in quality news and telling the public what they need to know. We hope you'll stand with us there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Todd Urick from the nonprofit Common Frequency in Sacramento area. And I just wanted to say, although the internet is perceived to be the future of communications, radio is still by far the most effective and efficient way to deliver news to a specific town or city. With an LP-FM transmitter in a city, you may reach around 80,000 people with very little cost. In comparison with streaming audio, you could streaming to 500 people would be cost prohibitive. Also with streaming, you're instead lucky to have 10 local people tuned in at one time, and if you don't have the money for constant advertising. Although radio has much potential for uniting our communities, starting a station is out of reach of the majority of people. I've been trying to help start a community radio station 60 miles from here in the Stockton, Modesto area for the last 4 years. This area is an area of almost 1 million people. It has high crime, unemployment, and the worst foreclosure rate in the country. Stockton was named the most miserable city in America by Forbes in 2009. Modesto's unemployment rate is over 19%. Unfortunately, there is not one community or public non-commercial educational radio station with a local studio in either city. However, one single religious broadcaster who owns hundreds of stations nationwide broadcasts to this area via 5 full-power radio stations and 3 translators, all via satellite. Locals are locked out of the band mainly because there are no ownership limits for non-commercial channels, and these stations aren't required to have local studios. In closing, I believe we can use radio more effectively if ownership, localism, and spectrum availability issues are addressed by the FCC. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Michael McCaskill. I'm a beekeeper and chair of my local community services district. My name is Michael McCaskill. I'm a beekeeper and the chair of my local community services district. I am not employed in radio or telecommunications in any way, but want to make my voice heard as just a consumer of the radio. I will say that I volunteer a lot at my local community radio station, and in a rural area we do not receive broadband, and it's all that much more important that we have a number of voices. I just echo some of what the last people have said, which is I really do not feel that I've gotten an increasing diversity in views, even though I do have a larger diversity of sources. And also what that last gentleman said about all these non-local radio stations who are essentially a computer and a satellite hookup dominating the system that is not local radio. And I believe that all local media should have offices and reporters and local content. And even if it's local content that is, say, only 8 hours a day, whereas somebody else is able to have content going all day, if the smaller amount of local content should be preferable, because we're getting the mainstream over and over and over again, and we need more voices to be heard. And I'd like to point out, too, that the composition of the panel, I mean, we need more of us here, and I'm glad to get the perspectives of the CEOs and the CFOs, but we're the ones who need to be served and not them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mark Guidotti. My family and friends know me as a recovering radio station owner. For Mr. Hartenstein, I have a question about You had mentioned, you gave some statistics earlier about the number of people who view your internet properties. Do you have some numbers for the broadcast properties as well? I'm curious how those ratios stack up, broadcast versus internet, both in terms of audience viewership and how do the revenues go? And the reason is, at some point, especially I have the two world's oldest living teenagers at home in their late 20s who've never paid for anything, and they vow they're not going to get a television set. When they move out, they're going to watch everything on the internet. They're absolutely in love with Hulu. And so the question is, they view TV as strictly just another stream. And they say, they're in that group that says that if I had my choice between giving back all the broadcast spectrum and turning it over to broadband, I would much rather do that, they say, because they view that as the wave of the future and a much more convenient way for them to get the content they like. So I guess my question is, do you view your TV stations, or will your senior executives at some point view the TV stations as just another stream? And do you have the numbers at this point to support that there's a trend in that direction?
Any of our general managers from any of our television stations, the 23 across the country, don't view themselves as just another stream. They've all been in television for a while.
Yeah.
They have far evolved from the get a position on the dial and just sit back and take the advertising revenues. It is a real fight out there for them. We have a mix of television stations amongst the Tribune stations, independents, CW affiliates, Fox affiliates, and NBC and ABC. So there are mostly, with the exception of Los Angeles and Chicago, in smaller markets, certainly not the top 10 outside of those. They are competing with network affiliates. They are competing with other individual broadcasters. And my point was simply one where they are able to bring a broader range of news, covering local issues in a very broad and ethnically and demographically diverse areas such as Chicago and LA, by augmenting their own news gathering capabilities with those of the newsrooms of the newspapers that they're with. So I don't know if that answers your question, or I did.
Or a matter, we seem to be mixing today a little bit distribution versus content, right? And so it seems more like the content becomes the more important vehicle of the distribution. And when I say, I mean not to trivialize or minimize or to offend, when I say that do you view, or do your executives view the TV stations as quote-unquote just another stream, as if it's just a trivial thing. But clearly it's diminishing in importance over time as the internet begins to pick up steam and you have more mobility and so forth. So, is the importance of a broadcast license, in your view, maybe 10 or 15 years from now going to be considerably less than it is today?
I think it will be important to us then, as it is today. It is certainly, again, forgive me, but it is driven by our ability to generate revenues from that. I think we are looking at a variety of options with the digital channels that we can spread to. I don't have specific numbers for you, but what we are looking at is to differentiate the way television stations operate today from where they operated and how they operated in the 60s. They have to. It's a very competitive world out there.
Thank you.
Do any of our other panelists have anything they'd like to say on that subject?
It's a very interesting question. In 15 years, what's going to happen? And nobody has a crystal ball. But, I hope this doesn't offend anyone. I hope that, the value of a broadcast license in 15 years is substantially less than it is today. And, I think we're not that far away from a future that has ubiquitous, ultra-high bandwidth internet connections that is sort of the ultimate democratizer of information.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Cousins. I'm a communications attorney in Oakland, California. I want to thank you, Mr. Lake, and all of you for putting this session together. I think it's a valuable exercise for everybody. I had the opportunity to serve on the commission's staff in the era of Chairman Charles Ferris, and my first job on the staff was to prepare a digest of the multiple ownership rules. And I know that digest circulated on the 8th floor, and as a result of it, there was an initiative that was pushed by Chairman Ferris and especially by Commissioner Tyrone Brown to promote diversity by possibly divesting AM-FM combinations. And I know this went to the lengths of putting a condition on the renewals of AM-FM combos locally, pending the results of a rulemaking that might actually divest them. This was not just something that the commission did under the Democrats. I know that the previous commission, under Richard Wiley, and I think it went all the way back to Dean Birch, developed a rulemaking to divest local newspaper broadcast combinations. And that rulemaking finally kind of fizzled and resulted in a few tiny divestitures in isolated communities that had no other media, like Anniston, Alabama, and Watertown, New York. And the AM-FM combo thing, as you know, kind of fizzled as well. And I've taken the lesson from that it is really not possible to use divestiture to unwind combinations after they've come into being. And so I just make the observation that if maybe 4 years from now, in 2014, you wake up and decide that a merger of Comcast and NBC was a tragic error, there won't be a thing that anyone can do about it.
Thank you. Michael's taller than I am. My name's Warren Trumbley. I've been in broadcasting close to 40 years, radio and television. I'm president of KAXT TV, Channel 1 here in the Bay Area. I want to just go a little history, and I thank the commission and the panel for being here because there's great information, great questions. But if we go back and look several years back with the Turner 2 case, when all of a sudden cable must carry was a requirement, it spawned multiple television networks. You know, we tend to be short-sighted and only look at today and tomorrow. But at that time, it spawned 4 new television networks. Then the networks grew and were starting to flourish. We started getting consolidation. One by one, the networks went away. So, you know, as much as I love KCRA in Sacramento, one of my favorite stations, I've been watching that since 1963, great news, great talent, fantastic station. What I look at is, and I watch 58 News, and I watch news on KCRA. But what I'm seeing is that we have one news source looking at one set of items. The newscasts are different, but if we had 2 eyes looking at the same story, we get a different perspective. So I have concern about consolidation, and I would not like to see more. Diversity is, I think, key to the broadcast industry. That's why, me being a pink guy, I've focused in the Bay Area here, working with Ravi, to find as many voices as possible and to develop local entrepreneurs to do Vietnamese programming, Chinese programming, Korean programming, and Spanish programming. The parts of the community that are not being served, these are underserved markets, and I think as broadcasters, we need to look in that direction, how we can serve the underserved. Thank you so much. Thank you.
If I could just follow up with a question for our panelists based on the point that Mr. Trombley made. There was a recent Pew study of the Baltimore media market that concluded that there were 53 sources of news and information when you consider broadcast and the internet and other sources, which sounds really good, and it sounds like what a lot of people say, that we're going through a news and information renaissance. But then Pew dug a little deeper, and what they found was a full 95% of those stories originated either from stories that were published in Tribune's Baltimore Sun or a random story that was on radio or television. And the question is, if one of the fundamental principles of a democracy is that we need people to have diverse sources of news and information, are are our people being served by the media at this time? And if that's the case, is increased consolidation a good idea? I know that one of the arguments is, please allow consolidation because it allows us to become economically viable, and without these combinations, we wouldn't have news and information. But I also think on the other side that this Pew study is rather compelling, and I guess I'd like to hear from our panelists on that. Perhaps Mr. Hartenstein could start with his thoughts.
I haven't read the Pew study, but I'll take what you just said and try to go from there. Baltimore is one of our publishing markets, and while I am not responsible for what is done in Baltimore there, I can assure you that the bulk of what the Baltimore Sun produces is generated from their newsroom, with the possible exception of once in a while a story that might come from Los Angeles that we share with them that might not have been generated otherwise with their span of coverage, or from one of our foreign correspondents, which for the Tribune publishing company, we operate out of Los Angeles. I think the focus of Baltimore's newsroom is probably 95% on their local market, because that's the market they serve. Much the same, perhaps not 95% as it is in Los Angeles in terms of our local market. The bulk of our editorial folks, which number for us about 550, Chicago Tribune about 450, are focused on Southern California, more at large. We're a big state, and then some national and some foreign. So as we run our news organization, we tend to focus on the market that we serve and how news going on in other parts of the world affects us. How does the collapse of the Greek economy ripple through Europe and through New York and affect us here in Southern California? Those are the types of things that we try to cover because we have a very ethnically diverse constituency in Los Angeles as well. As to things that we then promulgate on our websites, they're all derived from the same news gathering function that we have in our newsroom. We have converted to a 24/7 operation with news, which is very different than just even a few years ago. Most print publications have. They keyed onto one deadline a day. We no longer do that. We can't afford to do that because our constituency wants the news when it's happening, regardless of the day and the time. So, I think in terms of diversity, and I'll speak just from Los Angeles Times and Tribune point of view, in terms of diversity of news sources, we know that much of the news that appears on the Internet, the larger Internet, if I may, is coming from a few large news organizations and is repeated and retransmitted and carried forward that way. We're very much concerned about that. That's why we still have the number of journalists that we do, which is large by any means, and a newsroom and a support organization for the two largest properties of Tribune that number about 1,000 is somewhat unheard of in this day and age, and we intend to do everything we can to keep that robust and diverse a news organization at hand.
There's a pattern that I think Ed was just referring to. There's a financial gating factor going on, which is as people can find this information in more places, the audience fragments, which makes it much harder to make money off of it from an advertising perspective, which makes it much harder to produce the content that generated the audience in the first case. So at least online, you'll certainly see a lot of people fronting and sort of building discovery engines or access mechanisms, stuff that was produced further back by somebody else. And I don't know where the balance point is. There's benefit in easier access, but then it gets a lot more difficult to produce a lot of high-quality content because it's a lot harder to monetize it from advertising? I don't know what the answer is. I just can see that that's the force that's definitely underway.
I want to make a point, and I just want to use a simple anecdote because I've worked in local newsrooms here, and I'm very much a journalist first. Consolidation has most definitely impacted the way news is delivered. And I'll tell you a quick story about it. On a Saturday night, Jonathan, who's sitting in the crowd, who actually worked for a Tribune station in Chicago as a reporter, called me up and said, I just broke a story. There were about 9 or about a dozen people killed here in a grisly slaying. It happened on a Saturday night. He called me up at 11 o'clock Central Time. It was 9 o'clock Pacific Time, and I was in the newsroom at a local station. I found this out, and nothing on the wires, nothing on AP, nothing on CNN, nothing at all. And I asked the producer of the station, when I was working behind the scenes, I said, this is something that came from my friend, a trusted friend, a journalist, and his videos on the website. I can corroborate all this stuff. And basically she told me, if it's not on the AP, it doesn't exist. And this is the mentality, I think, of a lot of different stations. And I understand the AP vets content, and that's important. You need to have trusted sources of information. But this happens all too often where we have just a few sources of information, whether it's CNN or NBC News Channel or the AP, and we're not fostering enterprise journalism whatsoever. There's a couple of stations here in this market that are doing a good job with that, and they value that. The Bay Area is a very unusual market, but for the most part, it's homogenized. The product is homogenized. We have an 18 to 22-minute news hole. You got your B block filled. You got your weather. You got your a little bit of sports, but now the sports has been paired off on a lot of these stations on the weekend. So they don't cover high school football and so on and so forth. So you have a generic block, and then you get feeds from Washington coming in and from CNN or your other affiliates. And are we being well served as a democracy? I don't believe so. I think we need more news outlets. We need different voices. I mean, look, part of the reason, and I just got a text message from my news director, so my cover has been officially blown. One of the reasons I stay as an active reporter is I know that if I do not continue to do this, how many Indian American television reporters have you met? A couple of us. How many Asian American? Jonathan was the only Asian American male reporter in the whole city of Chicago. And Tribune just cut his hours entirely in the last 6 months. I hope they can bring him back. This is what's going on. We don't have enough voices in our newsroom, let alone in ownership. And so consolidation cuts to the core of that. And this is why I fight to stay on, and even I don't get paid much to do it, but I want to continue to be a journalist and fight the good fight and at least report the stories from perspectives that aren't usually shown.
Thank you.
Bill, I was just going to weigh in just with coming at it a little bit from a different angle from the standpoint of SESME absolutely believes that diversified content and the sources of content is incredibly important. Our service is all about going out there and delivering an end-to-end television service that's affordable to consumers. But at the end of the day, it's also about making sure that content and the programming that's relevant to you as a viewer is set up and delivered in a manner so that you can access it. So we spend a great deal of time not only trying to bring a lot of that diversified content onto our platform and making sure that gets into the home, but also helping consumers discover that programming. So there's just take over-the-air channels here in the Bay Area. I think Ravi had talked about 70 plus or so that are right here. A lot of folks don't necessarily know about the programming that's available on it. So there's a lot of things that within SESME and the service that we're doing in terms of program recommendation, in terms of bringing that relevant content up to the surface and introducing consumers to programming that maybe they just quite candidly didn't know about, even though they might actually watch that particular source of content, or introducing them to new sources of content and programming that they haven't seen in the past.
Thank you.
My name is Gavin Dahl. I'm a reporter and radio producer, and I want to thank Mr. Kapoor for his comments on diversity. I think you're really a public servant, sir, and I hope you are profitable in your efforts at KAXT. When Americans elected Barack Obama president, the FCC got a new chairman and a new mandate. But as newspaper business models fail, you seem close to allowing even more consolidation. By allowing these media companies to get even bigger, you're putting reporting further at risk. The public has lost hundreds of journalism jobs in the Bay Area alone, according to the Newspaper Guild today, And as I look at the all-male suits on your panel and think about the fact that you held your workshop here at a private school where we had to pay to park, I get concerned. Will Obama's FCC serve corporate masters as Bush's FCC did? That's kind of the question today in my mind. If you loosen ownership regulations for these suits, though they claim they care about newsrooms, I don't trust them. And if you're naive enough to, then I don't trust you either. Because you work for the public. The United States needs experts to help our elected representatives regulate. So I ask you today, please serve the country and not corporate persons.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Clayton John Leander. I hail today from Vallejo, California, where we have had the honor of recently being awarded with an NCE-FM license for our news station. Let me tell you about Vallejo, California. It has a long radio history through Mare Island. It was, for example, had a relay station that was instrumental in getting the word from Pearl Harbor to the rest of the United States. With the naval closure, that facility closed down. But the community continued to contribute to the rest of the country. You might have heard of the musicians Johnny Otis, who helped to bring the Cuban clave with rhythm and blues onto our airwaves and has become part of a national treasure. Sly and the Family Stone, he got his start in local radio. If it were not for local radio, it would not have been possible for him to just walk into somewhere, have his records played, and contribute to the American music lexicon. Vallejo, California was recently had to undergo a difficult decision to undergo bankruptcy. And here we have a community of about 120,000 people sandwiched between the major markets of Sacramento, San Jose, Stockton, and San Francisco, yet has had little or no opportunity to have a voice of its own in its airwaves. A local UHF station, Channel 66, was recently, actually about a decade ago, sold for $38 million. The station had never served the community I know. I once worked for it. This is to say that we really need some kind of administrative and legislative opportunities to expand the opportunity for local communities to have local voices. I support the remarks of Annie Folger, who spoke earlier about community media centers, PEG access stations, and this is something that could be considered as a model for all broadcast and localism. I'm a little disappointed today to not see much representation or input from the nonprofit, non-commercial community as to the future of broadcast and media, but that is a very important component to having information democracy and participatory democracy. And one last point, we also need to do something about universal broadband for all communities, but not limit community input to broadband. We don't want to just ghettoize everybody, the people to the internet while major corporations hold the large broadcast licenses. There need to be equity for both. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just note that the Commission just recently in Washington, about a week and a half ago, had a full-day workshop on the future of public broadcasting, so we're very interested and concerned in that issue.
Hi, my name is Jose Aquino, and I represent KCSW Television for the Inland Empire, Southern California. And I just wanted to thank you, and I want to thank Mr. Warren for inviting me here today. Somehow I missed your invitation, but I'm very happy to be here with you guys. Thank you very much. I want to just to emphasize how important the low power stations are. This KCSW low power station that serves the Inland Empire, during the fires that we have almost every year, but we had 3 really bad ones. And on the first one, none of the big television networks really help us. KCSW was the only one that was there. And thanks to KCSW, the authorities were able to move faster because we have images that radio stations couldn't do it, and networks were there, and we did the best we could, but we saved lives. Big Bear, we lost over 800 properties, houses burned down. Networks came and covered the story a couple of days later, and they were so worried about O.J. Simpson's house to be burned and Ted Turner in L.A. we were worried about the communities that we serve, our families, and we were there for them. And we have a lot of people thanking my people there in the station and saying that without our help, it would be a worse disaster. I believe that we are the voice of the community. We don't make any money, lower stations. We're here just to serve the communities. And that's really a fact that most lower power stations struggle very badly to survive. And again, without our presence and without our immediate response to disasters, I believe that if the commission move forward and remove our license or do anything, it could be a big mistake and it could lead to a big disaster in the event of more fires. Like the last one we lost 5 firemen. Nobody can help them. They got trapped in between the fire on all 4 sides. The wind, it was evil. And those heroes die because no big network with those fancy helicopters they have. They could have come and covered the news, but there's no value. They focus more on the big metro areas like Los Angeles, where the money is, and I really understand. We are here again to do the best we can to respond immediately and help the local authorities to help and serve the local communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Saunders. I'm the programming manager at the Media Center. I work with Rebecca Fisher and Annie Folger. Pull this over. So I just wanted to remind you that there are 1,400 PEG stations across America. And one of the really valuable things that we provide is training, low cost or no cost training. We have an excellent studio training program whereby we empower people from the community to learn all the roles necessary to produce their own TV show. Also, we have a really vibrant field production training program, and we provide low cost or no cost access to equipment for citizen journalists to run out there and do their thing. Rebecca up here has empowered these kids through media literacy classes and training to figure out that they can make a real difference even at their middle school and high school age. Rebecca's done a great job. We are one of 1,400 stations that provides training, and that sometimes might get lost, but that's a real important component of what your local cable access station does. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll next take a question we've received on our Twitter feed, but please don't go away.
My name is Bob. Question we received on Twitter. What new media tools would the panel recommend that failing single broadcast station owners adopt to possibly save their stations? I ask because all of my small women and minority-owned singleton broadcast station owner clients are currently struggling to stay on the air.
Keep interjecting here. I think one of the reasons that Warren and I set out to do what we did, leveraging the best technology possible. And again, we don't have billions of dollars in the bank putting this together. We're just private entrepreneurs. We leverage off-the-shelf existing technology that the cable and satellite companies use right now to compress signals, and that's how we got 12 video channels and soon to be 8 audio channels. Other stations could do that, but we have other stations in this market that have 1 channel. And so there's no question. That's why perhaps the FCC is looking at taking back spectrum. There are a lot of full-power broadcasters that are not maximizing their capabilities. They claim they're using it for mobile or what have you. But there's technology out there to maximize that spectrum for the public benefit. So for this station group here, I would encourage them to explore business models like what we've done. What we did is we've amortized the cost. We are still struggling, no question about it. We had dark days. We incurred something about $50,000 to $100,000 in extra legal and engineering fees when we had this whole snafu with the other broadcaster, which I don't think should have ever happened in the first place. But and we're still paying off that debt. And so I really believe, if they can somehow find enough capital to leverage some of these new technologies that are out there, they can find niches in the community that have never been served. But it's increasingly, we're very lucky we're in San Francisco. If we were in another market, I don't think we'd have been able to explore what we're doing. So it's an incredible challenge. And again, this is why people have mentioned low power. We're not on a level playing field. I mean, I couldn't even get I went down to the cable show last week and tried to meet with Comcast. Do you think they ushered me right in and say, "Oh yeah, come on in, let's talk about all of your diverse channels"? No, and I'd love to have a meeting with them. It'd be great. But is it likely, without spending tens of thousands of dollars on consultants and trying to get one single meeting and convincing them that what we're doing is of local news and local entertainment and local information is in the public interest? I mean, we have to sell them on distributing us. And it's a real challenge. So, I mean, it depends on the market. I think there are some new technologies that can be used to serve the public interest. But again, the capital that it would take is significant.
Anybody else? Yeah, just from a current perspective, we're an unrated network on television, so I can't tell you how many people watched yesterday. But spot research that we've done suggests that, we touch quite a bit more people across digital distribution, formats. So we've got a Facebook application, we've got an active Twitter account, we're constantly doing social media marketing, and we're asking people that are following us within those social communities to help recruit more and really spread the word. That is one of the very few independent cable networks that really believe in journalism and the future of journalism, help us get the word out. So certainly some of the obvious choices like Twitter and Facebook. But, one thing we haven't talked much about that I think is profoundly important, which is time shifting of content consumption. So not just VOD on your television, but, all the video services that are out there and how those, how that content is being consumed. And many of them, like iTunes, for example, enables broadcasters to have subscribing bases of followers, meaning that, people sign up to follow you, and every time you release a new episode or a new piece of content, they get notified of that fact, and, they're invited back into the experience. So growing your subscriber base within those viral social communities and pushing your content through there, is a way to really increase your revenue.
Anybody else? Mr. Matheny?
Just going to add that I think, respectfully, there's an inherent problem with the question because it's what one thing can you do, and I don't think there is any one thing. There is no magic bullet, and then I think the other points that have been made here are right on target. It depends on the market. If you're in a market, such as this that is highly connected, you have a lot of different options versus, I believe the gentleman earlier, the beekeeper, said that, they don't have broadband where he is. So, I mean, there are a lot of different factors that come into play, but I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's trying a number of them and then trying to leverage them in so that they're complementary. Such as some of the examples we showed earlier of the way some of our stations are combining what they're doing with wireless and what they're doing online to help promote an overall virtuous cycle of usage and relationship, not just a one-way street.
Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome.
My name is Bob Kirkledy. I represent myself, the public. The question I have is the distribution channels. How many of you advertised that this meeting was going to take place? And for the FCC, is your calendar online that the public can know that these meetings are going to take place? Because I read three newspapers, I listen to 2 hours of radio a day, talk radio, and I listen to 2 hours plus of news. And nobody said anything about this meeting. My wife discovered it on the internet. That was my first question. Another part of it is a member of the FCCs have left the FCC and worked for the industry. Who's representing us, the people? I don't have a sense that anyone here represents us. I think special interest is taking over too many areas. I guess the end of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just say that we did make efforts to try to publicize this.
Where?
Obviously, I think there was a show on Fox News just last night, but with the local broadcasters and through the university, we obviously could have done a better job, and we'll try to do a better job the next time.
When's your next meeting and where?
Excuse me?
Where is your next meeting and what and when?
We don't know at this point, but
we don't know.
We don't have another one scheduled after this one.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I'll just ask whether any of our panelists have a parting thought they'd like to impart before we adjourn for lunch and break until the next panel.
Just like to echo some of what was said earlier, and just the importance of localism, the importance of diversity of ownership, and combining that with these new technologies is going to be crucial to ensuring our democracy and the way our government functions. I also think it's critical to our national security as well as our local ability to respond and be participative or participatory in our communities. And local broadcasters play such a vital and important role. Anything that can be done to increase that role and increase the diversity of voices that are represented at that level is greatly appreciated.
I agree wholeheartedly with what Sam's saying, and just in terms of maybe final comments, I think that our company, SESME, is a great example of the innovation and technology that's resulted as the DTV transition has been a success, and we're not even a year, or we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary, and I think that there's so many opportunities and so many great companies that are gonna come to fruition over the next several years. And I think let's not block any of that, but let's give companies maybe that are just beginning and are moving in the same direction as SESME an opportunity to thrive. And local broadcasters can absolutely be a part of that. And in the end, the consumer is who's going to win.
One theme that I'd like to close with is that I believe as the FCC reviews its rulemaking in the future relative to the markets and the voices in those markets, there's a reason we call mainstream media mainstream. And I think it has to do with brand and trust and reputation and legacy. And I don't know exactly how, with all these different distribution channels, you'll finally figure out a formula for when it's too much consolidation, too much. But I think part of that ultimately will have to boil down to this notion of reputation as well, because the reason we have singular news sources that get redistributed and repopulated, and that story that's been in Baltimore that was published a number of times but really had one or two sources, has probably as much to do with the reputation of sources as the resources of all those various outlets. So while resources, yes, are constrained, and it's tough to make a business of it, the other thing that I think is important is that as a populace, we tend to flock, and we tend to look for those trusted voices. And as the landscape changes, I think that somehow has to be worked into the formula.
I would just close by urging the FCC to embrace and realize what good has come out of technology. In the MVPD space, the multi-channel video programming distributors space, where you go back as little as 15 years ago, when the average household in America, or perhaps only about 70% of the households in America, could only get a few channels, what was within reach of their local stations, to an environment today where virtually anyone in America can get hundreds of channels and hundreds of audio channels. Just look at the good that technology has brought forth. There are technologies, as we've witnessed today, where you take the advents of compression and other things and make low-power television, low-power radio stations available. I think far more good can come from that than others. And I think that the advent of technology to come through the internet and alternate ways of distributing it through all the new technology innovations, and none more in the media space where it is manifesting itself, are ones that the Commission should take a strong look at in looking how they regulate and realizing that through that technology, multiple voices are more and more prevalent today than I think they ever were and can be for the future.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists very much, and thank you for attending and for all of your comments and questions. We'll adjourn now until 2 p.m. when we'll proceed with our second panel. Thank you.